Hi, and welcome to the Microsoft Live Q&A covering SystemCenter 2012. Today, over the next 2 hours, we're going to address a lot of your most common questions. We know there's a lot of popularity with this great new product, the most integrated data center management solution on the market. And so Justin and I, we're going to spend the next 2 hours answering your questions. And we have a great team of live experts as well, so feel free to jump into the chat room, ask anything you want, and our great support team will be able to address your questions. Now, what we're going to do as part of this presentation, even though it's kind of open-ended, we're still going to try to keep some structure. So we're going to start off with a brief introduction and actually quickly walk through the different SystemCenter components, just so everybody's on the same stage. Next, we're going to move to our Orchestrator expert, Justin, over here, and kind of give a foundation for our automation using SystemCenter Orchestrator, as we're going to kind of tie that in throughout the rest of the day. After we cover our automation, we're going to look at deploying and operating our infrastructure, our application management, and finally take any questions regarding the hybrid cloud. I'm Simon Perriman, a Senior Technical Evangelist with Microsoft, and I cover all the different SystemCenter products as well as Microsoft virtualization. My role as a Technical Evangelist means I get to speak to you guys out there, hear what you want to learn about, and so please, make sure you give us feedback. This is great through Twitter, through any of these different Microsoft Virtual Academy channels. And of course, don't forget to interact with us through the live Q&A so we can answer your questions right now. Justin, why don't you introduce yourself?
Awesome. Thanks, Simon. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Justin Incarnato. I'm a Senior Program Manager on the Automation and Integration team. Been with the company about 15 years. Shout out to my wife today for our 13th anniversary.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. So thanks for having me today, Simon, to talk to our customers.
All right. Well, what we're going to do as part of this live Q&A, we do have some objectives here. We want to make sure that you get your questions answered. This is the goal. So we want to say, ask us anything. Now, while the focus is on kind of the core SystemCenter products, we'll go through this list shortly, but we also want to look at SystemCenter integration as well. That's one of the biggest advantages. Not only is SystemCenter the best integrated data center management product, but it offers unmatched integration with third parties, other applications, public cloud, private cloud, OEMs, so literally throughout the stack. So as you kind of browse this list, look at Advisor, integration with Server, Windows Azure, HyperV. We're also going to be open to touching on VMware and Citrix management, as well as Unix and Linux. So anything you want, as it relates to SystemCenter, happy to go answer your questions today. Now, also want to remind you, we do have some great additional content available on the Microsoft Virtual Academy, www.microsoftvirtualacademy.com. So this includes training across all the different SystemCenter components, both high-level vision as well as deep technical depth training. And make sure you check back regularly as we continue to add more tracks every single week. Now, let's get started. The first question that I'm going to kind of answer ahead of time, because I'm expecting it, is give me the quick overview of the different SystemCenter components. So Justin and I are just going to quickly walk you through these, and then we'll jump over to your questions. Now, first component is App Controller. This is brand new for SystemCenter 2012, Service Pack 1, and this is essentially our self-service portal for our infrastructure. So App Controller does have a dependency on Virtual Machine Manager. Think of it as basically App Controller is the self-service portal to control anything that Virtual Machine Manager does. So this is deploying services, virtual machines, clusters, managing and pooling your storage, your networking, your compute, as well as optimizing and load balancing those resources across different hypervisors, including Hyper-V, VMware, and Citrix. The next component is Configuration Manager and Endpoint Protection. This is essentially our way to protect, inventory, and ensure that all of the different hardware throughout our data center and our client devices are fully secured, compliant, and patched. So think of this as a central inventory management system, ensuring that all of the devices have the correct software, the correct security levels, and the correct settings. Now, Endpoint Protection is kind of a somewhat of an add-on. It's actually integrated within the Configuration Manager GUI, and essentially Endpoint Protection is our malware and antivirus program for both servers and, of course, our client machines. Next, we have Data Protection Manager. This is our backup and recovery solution. So it protects our physical servers, our virtual machines, the applications running within the virtual machine. And it also protects all of our resources as you migrate them throughout the data center as well. So DPM, basic backup and recovery utility here. Now, how about Operations Manager?
Awesome. Thanks, Simon. Operations Manager is kind of the flagship monitoring system. When you look at deploying agents, when you look at deploying agents on your Linux boxes, on your Windows servers, your network devices. It's really the System Center flagship when it comes to management and monitoring. Remediation, we've got management packs, just about every workload that you could imagine, from Exchange to SharePoint. And it's a very extensible platform as well, Simon. And so you'll get a lot of partners, a lot of ISVs that will actually write their own really good management packs to monitor systems that we may not have an MP4. So that's really when you talk about Operations Manager. Beautiful dashboards, easy to deploy agents, easy to integrate with the management packs that we talked about.
And to add, it's management throughout the stack as well.
Absolutely.
We're managing the hardware as well. So not just the software, not just the VMs, but literally any component within the data center we can communicate with.
Yep.
And then how about Orchestrator?
So Orchestrator, the team I'm currently on, this is our automation tool of choice. What the customers love the most that we hear about is this nice visual WYSIWYG designer where you're literally dragging and dropping management of your applications and services. The integration packs, we have them from Netcool to HP to vSphere to Azure to, you can even use native PowerShell if you don't have a particular integration pack. That either Microsoft has written or one of our partners have written. We have full-blown PowerShell support where you can integrate with any system that might just have a module out there.
Great. And we want to encourage you guys, if you have questions about how Orchestrator can integrate with pretty much anything, make sure you ask those questions. We have a great Orchestrator demo environment prepared, so happy to show you what you want to see.
Yeah, we'll get into that.
Now, next on the list is Service Manager.
Yep, Service Manager, another component in the automation and integration suite. This is really a tool that's wrapping your business processes. For example, if I have an alert that gets triggered when I'm using Operations Manager about a particular VMM server, maybe that alert comes into Service Manager, says, hey Simon, I know how to remediate this. I'm going to fire off this Orchestrator runbook on the back end to add another host to my host group, for example, to alleviate the compression that I'm feeling in the cloud that I'm offering to my customers. Do you want to approve that? Click the service request, OK it, and the automation flows through. So this is the centralized CMDB that allows you to keep track of all those assets, connectivity into your AD, into Config Manager, integration with Orchestrator, to fully kind of automate your business processes.
Excellent. And then the final one on the list, of course, is Virtual Machine Manager, what a lot of our infrastructure specialists are already familiar with. VMM allows us to manage our storage, network our fabric, and this is where we essentially go and communicate with App Controller when we're offering the self-service portal. So I expect we're probably going to get a lot of questions on VMM.
Awesome
I expect a lot of our audience is familiar with it, so we won't spend too long, but make sure you go and ask these questions. Now, as we move on, have we started to get anything from the audience yet?
Yeah, we have, Simon. I've started to jot a couple of these questions down. We've got a question from China. So you went into and you said, hey, Simon, or hey, Justin, we've got all these cool products in the System Center suite. What do I get with a System Center license? That's one of the first questions that's come in.
Okay, good question. System Center licensing. So I think the best way to address that is actually to pull up a website here, Microsoft.com/SystemCenter. Because on this website, this is actually our licensing data sheet. So Microsoft.com/SystemCenter. And basically, the way our System Center is licensed, on the data center side, there's two options. So here's the Get Licensing Details data sheet, opens a PDF. And so basically, for the data center version, we get all of the components. So data center or standard edition, you get everything in it.
All the System Center components.
Every single System Center component, so all 8. So that's basically the 8 that we just discussed.
Nice.
Now, kind of the big difference between the standard edition and the data center edition is virtualization rights.
Okay.
Are you going to be in a highly virtualized environment? Right. If so, you don't want to have any limitations on the number of instances you can deploy and manage because, as you start to think about VMs, you're not tracking them as individual servers, right? You're just throwing them out there.
Right.
So we don't really want to have any scale limitations on the data center edition. If you're not used in the highly virtualized environment, just wanted to maybe manage 1 or 2 hosts, then the standard edition will be ideal for you. Now, there's also some client versions as well. So if you're more focused on the enterprise client, there's a few different options that you have with regards to the configuration manager package, the endpoint protection subscription, or the client management suite. And as you can see, there's a few different components that are packaged as part of these. But for the most part, our data center administrators, you're going to want to focus on this System Center Data Center Edition. Now, the other big change with the licensing that's important is these products are no longer sold individually. As we said, right, single package, you get everything.
Wonderful. I mean, that's the feedback I get on that, Simon, is, hey, you know, we led with Operations Manager, we led with Config Manager. We didn't know that we get Orchestrator and Service Manager and all these other products as part of the license.
It's a great way to get people to kind of try it out, right?
Yes.
If you have to go and purchase a full license of Orchestrator to just demo it, to try it out, that's kind of a barrier to entry.
Yes.
But we really wanted to remove that and say, you know what? You get SystemCenter, you're getting everything. So even if you're not ready to build orchestration today or not ready to do self-service, you still have that tool set to be able to do it when you are ready.
Nice.
So hopefully it makes things a little easier for our customers here.
Good. Simon, next question's kind of coming in on the tail end of that. Most of these products, like, you know, they're SQL based. You know, Operations Manager, Orchestrator, all needing SQL as a dependency. Do we also need a license for the SQL piece?
Good question. So in our past release, you would actually get a SQL Express license as part of that. But with 2012, we actually now require the full version of SQL Server. Now, don't worry, you get a full version of SQL Server license to use as part of the SystemCenter license.
Nice.
But just to be clear, the rights are to use it as that SystemCenter database.
Just hosting SystemCenter specific DBs.
Exactly. So, for example, you can't get the SQL license, go create a new virtual machine and run a full instance of a SQL database that's serving something else with that. And one of the other nice things about this single SQL license for this database is you can aggregate all of your different SystemCenter components into a single SQL Server. So basically, the way I actually have my lab built, I have all my different SystemCenter components running on different VMs, and I have a single central SQL Server.
Nice.
This just simplifies the management, you know. Now, in real-world production, would it be best to kind of separate these instances? Maybe, depending on the amount of traffic, amount of workflow.
Right.
But for a basic configuration, deploying
nice
these,
POC.
perfect.
Clean,
Yep.
Perfect.
So don't worry, you do get your SQL license as part of this.
Nice, nice. One more question for you, Simon, I think, when we kind of the tail end of that one as well. We talked about the upgrade path. We know that we just released SP1. A lot of customers may still be running RTM. What does that upgrade path look like if I'm running in production with an RTM rig or rigs and I want to go up to the SP1 release?
Great question. So the answer to that is not very easy because it depends basically on the different component. So all these different components, they have different upgrade paths, different upgrade mechanisms. Some of them use an in-place upgrade, some use a migration, some require you to kind of copy the data offsite, re-import it. So our easiest way to actually kind of walk you through that is go into Bing and actually taking a look at SystemCenter 2012 upgrade sequence, because one thing that a lot of people do not realize is that there's a lot of interdependencies between these different components. And so as you're doing an upgrade and you're thinking, hey, you know, VMM is talking to Operations Manager. Which one do I upgrade first? It's actually important to follow this guidance to make sure that you do upgrade these in the optimal order so that the down-level dependencies still remain persistent. Because you're not going to do this in, you know, an hour, right? You're not going to upgrade all of these at once, have the environment ready in an hour. Like this might be, you know, you do one week, the second. So during that whole upgrade process, we still need to do it, I guess, in steps to ensure that we continue to support everything.
So we've got that documentation then to say, hey, Simon, if you've got Orchestrator connecting into OM and OM talking to VMM and Service Manager in there and VMM in there, we have some prescriptive guidance to say, hey, upgrade your integration packs first, maybe upgrade your OM agents second, make sure the connectivity's there, maybe pro integration with VMM, whatever the case might be.
That's exactly it. Follow this step-by-step guide. Again, upgrade sequencing for SystemCenter. And I believe in the appendix, it actually even talks about the dependencies between these different components.
Nice.
Yeah, here we go. So if you actually take a look at this appendix, under Operations Manager, under Orchestrator, it tells you here's dependencies with Operations Manager, with Service Manager, Config Manager. So, you know, as you're kind of going through this process, you may not have all of these interdependencies, but it's good for you to kind of be aware upfront what they are.
All these touch points, just in case.
Now, the final thing I want to show you is the actual upgrade documentation. So this is under TechNet. Go to SystemCenter, and let's say we click on Virtual Machine Manager. What you'll see under these in the TechNet article is upgrade path to 2012, and upgrade path to 2012 SP1.
Nice.
Now again, I want to emphasize each of these different components does have a different upgrade path, so I'm not going to just answer that for everything. Go take a look at the TechNet documentation. This will kind of get you rolling with everything you need.
Nice.
All right, so I'm going to go back to my questions, and I actually have one for you now, because just kind of looking at some of this integration piece, one of your expertise. Now, with all of these agents, we just talked about how they're interconnected. Most of the time, they do this by deploying what's called an agent. What exactly is an agent? How does it work? What type of performance overhead do we have with it?
Yeah, so the good thing is when you look at, let's take Operations Manager, for example. Operations Manager from the console allows you to reach out to servers and say, hey, I want to deploy an agent on a server that I care about, or a Linux machine that I care about, or maybe even a proxy agent on a network device that I care about. And what that allows me to do is essentially deploy what I call a worker bee, Simon. And that worker bee goes out there and sits on the server, looks at event logs, looks for particular events that come into the system, looks at a text file, remediates a service going down. And essentially, any of the work that needs to get done on this remote server is handled by the agent. And the cool thing about the agent as well, when you look at SCOM, for example, it has automatic diagnostics kind of built into itself. So you can not only say, hey, when a certain event happens, do this in response to it. And the good thing about it, too, is are these agents, you don't want to have to monitor your monitoring system.
Right.
And so these agents have built-in capabilities, allow them to kind of heal themselves. And so if the monitoring host agent, which is the one that sits on SCOM, starts to eat up too many resources, it'll actually bounce itself. It'll restart itself. If you have an author that's written a rule that may be less constructive in your environment, those rules will automatically turn themselves off. And so not only do you get the remote capabilities of doing full-blown workload management, for example, on a remote system, but you also get some self-healing capabilities with the agents. And typically the agents are pretty lightweight. Monitoring an XP box is very different from monitoring an Exchange server when you look at kind of the instance space. But at the end of the day, these agents are designed to run as efficiently and as low overhead as possible.
So they're not taking these 10% perfects, they're not collecting the data and processing it on that local box, right? Just collecting the data, sending it to the Operations Manager agent. That's where that intense processing happens.
And the cool thing about that too, Simon, it's a good point you bring up. Even if you have an agent, say, on an Exchange server, and the communication with its management server fails for whatever reason, the agent will actually queue data until its management server comes back online, or it fails over to a secondary management server. Likewise, if you have a management server that's talking to your SQL database at the top end, if that management server loses connectivity to the database, it will actually queue data on the management server level until its primary database comes back online, and then start feeding that data up there. And so there's kind of built-in checkpoints and built-in redundancy kind of all the way up the stack from the agent all the way to SQL.
Very nice. So next question I get is kind of along the same theme of integration. So what is the best way to deploy these different System Center components? And then can you co-locate two of these services on the same server?
Yeah. The question kind of always back is, it depends.
It depends. Right? What are you doing on
Yeah,
that?
for POCs, like you talked about when we were talking about the licensing piece earlier, putting all the servers and all the databases on that one SQL free license that you get with the enterprise agreement, that's wonderful. That's one way to do it. But when you think about how the customers would deploy these in a production environment, I see a lot of customers have their own SCOM instance, their own Operations Manager instance, because when you look at monitoring 2,000 servers, 2,500 servers, you want a dedicated back-end SQL box for the operational DB, you want a back-end SQL box for the data warehouse. If you look at products more into the automation and integration space, putting Service Manager and Orchestrator on the same box, typically a good practice.
That can make sense, right?
Yeah, VMM and App Controller, it's kind of what you led with when we opened up this event. Those are good components to have on the same server. DPM is traditionally installed on its own instance as well. And then when you talk about the SCCM and endpoint protection, SCCM has varied roles when you talk about distribution points and server locator points, and so those are typically dedicated as well, just when you think about the number of instances and the number of client workstations and even servers that SCCM is managing, much less all of the mobile devices that you would be responsible for as well. And so when you think about production environments, like you said, the documentation that we pointed to earlier, really good guidance on, hey, how many agents do you plan to deploy? How many management packs do you plan to deploy? How many virtual servers do you plan? How many hosts do you think you'll need? And based on that guidance, usually dictates how you'll design that implementation. But typically, that's how I see customers kind of break them up kind of per role.
Cool. Well, I'm going to extend on that. We have kind of a follow-up question here. What about running these inside virtual machines? So the short answer is absolutely supported. As we think of virtualization, We want to make sure that our server infrastructure can be fully virtualized, fully tested as well. So all of these are first-class citizens running inside VMs. And in fact, in my own lab, I'll jump to a demo in 1 second. I'll kind of show my lab environment briefly. This will actually show you a lot of these cohabitations, and everything that I have is running inside VMs. Now, there may be one exception as far as what you would actually put inside a VM, and that's Virtual Machine Manager. And what we can now do with SystemCenter 2012 is we can deploy VMM directly on top of a failover cluster. And so what this means is the Virtual Machine Manager service is actually highly available. It's monitored by the cluster host. So if the service crashes, we can restart it. We can move it to a different host. So there's full high availability as a direct first-class citizen running on a cluster with VMM. Can you virtualize VMM? Absolutely. In fact, let me jump over to my demo environment now, and I'll quickly show you how I've just got this configured, since we're going to be using this for a couple demos throughout the day, I'm sure. Okay, so what I have here, this is my very first server. This is my Service Manager server. And on this one, I actually did go ahead and co-locate Service Manager as well as Orchestrator. So I have my runbook designer here.
Nice.
I have Orchestrator. And again, the reason why these are so interconnected, a lot of times we'll get an alert, it will go trigger a workflow. Oftentimes a workflow will go write data to Service Manager. So by having these co-located, much better response time for both of them.
That automation, automatic remediation, customers love that. Absolutely.
Let's definitely get to some demos in that in a little bit as well. So then under my Operations Manager server, I have Operations Manager. I have my Application Performance Monitoring. Now in this case, since I'm monitoring a lot of different types of services, applications, servers, hardware, I even have some management packs here for some VMware monitoring. I actually just have Operations Manager running on its own VM. So I'm getting a lot of data that I'm collecting, aggregating here. Then the third server I'm going to show you here is my VMM server. Virtual Machine Manager, most of you guys have seen this. And also on here, I have App Controller deployed. So again, cohabitating these because App Controller directly connects to VMM. Then the final one, since this is kind of a lab environment, I have my domain controller here. Now, I don't have any of the SystemCenter components running on my domain controller because I kind of want to keep that DC free to perform the Active Directory interactions. However, I did decide to go and centralize my SQL Server database on here. And so across all my different SystemCenter components, I have the single database all located on that one domain controller. So this way, centralized, easier management, and I still get to take advantage of that single license.
Great proof of concept rig you've got set up there.
Awesome. So I'm looking at the next question that I have here, and we're going to now start to move towards our automation topic. So perfect segue here. Now, in a lot of our Microsoft material, we keep talking about these cloud concepts of standardization, automation. Why are these important? How do they fit in with SystemCenter in this private cloud?
Yeah, that's a great question too, Simon. When we talk about standardization, it directly relates to automation, and automation allows us to automate tasks that would be repetitive, mundane, time-consuming. And when we talk about standardization, it's really the error-prone piece of it. And so if I needed to create 100 user accounts, could I do that by hand? Absolutely. Do I want to be that guy in the IT shop that has that job? Probably not.
Could get kind of tedious, huh?
Could be kind of tedious, and I may look up at the clock more during the day than usual. But when you talk about automation, when we think about the integration packs that we have in Orchestrator, for example, Simon, if I wanted to create those accounts, or I wanted to create these Exchange mailboxes, or I wanted to create all these directories in FTP, or I wanted to spin up VMs in vSphere, or in HyperV, or in Azure, is there an automated way for me to do that? Is it easy? And we talk about orchestration and automation and standardization, it's really for that. I was talking to a customer, I guess about 2 weeks ago, and last year they were able to save 18,000 man hours with their automation piece. And so if you think about that, that's around 9 FTEs they're looking at.
That's a lot of time.
Yeah, and it frees these guys up. If I were to free up your time, Simon, from doing that, you could work on other strategic initiatives that we have around the company. Hey, I need you to work on this other deployment add-on. I need you to work on whatever it is that I can have you do rather than spinning up these user accounts manually. And the standardization comes into it because when you program these tasks and you automate these tasks, you get a consistent experience. When I execute a workflow that I've written, I know that it's going to run the same the first time I run it and the 100th time that I run it. And so you get that standardization across the board, and it reduces kind of the error that might be introduced with a human.
I mean, let's face it, humans make mistakes, right?
Yep.
You do the same 50-step process 50 times in a week,
Right.
chances are there's a mistake.
Yes.
So, one of the other kind of downstream benefits, of course, with the standardization is the fact that it's going to help with troubleshooting, right?
Yes.
If you say, let's say you go deploy a complex virtual machine manually, and there's a problem with it, well, then you actually have to spend that time trying to figure out what's the problem, what did I misconfigure?
Right.
But if you get that guaranteed same template structure,
Yes.
that standardized format, going to be deployed the same way every time, guarantee that consistency, and eliminate that kind of troubleshooting.
Yeah, kind of fire and forget it.
Exactly. So that's a great point. Now, moving along with these topics of automation here. First of all, we got a few questions saying, can you just give a quick overview of Orchestrator? But I wanted to kind of add on that and maybe make it integrate another question we have here. Can you show us the integration that we have with a few different components? First of all, why don't we take a start by looking at Orchestrator integration with SystemCenter?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So what I'm going to do, Simon, I'm going to go over to my demo rig, and what I've got here is the Runbook Designer. In the Runbook Designer, like we talked about earlier, that's kind of my white space. That gives me the ability to drag and drop activities. That allows me to configure my workflows. And when we talk about integration packs, I think the analogy we used last time we talked with the last MVA that we did, Orchestrator's kind of the Xbox. Big release coming today. And the integration packs are kind of the games. Right, and so when we talk about can we use the platform by itself, we absolutely can. So if you look at the screen, we've got our file management, we've got our email, notification, utilities. These are foundational objects, so I get these in the box ready to go. These allow me to reach into SQL. These allow me to send notifications. These allow me to look at text files. These allow me to move text files around and file management activities. Then when we add the integration pack, you'll see that I've got integration packs for Configuration Manager, for Operations Manager, for Service Manager, for Virtual Machine Manager. And these all plug in, allow me to easily integrate with these systems. And so if you look at some of the workflows I have, if I look at the Virtual Machine Manager workflow, for example, I can use a lot of the activities that are native to the IP, or I can use the .NET scripting abilities that allow me to run PowerShell commandlets. So maybe there's an activity, so the Virtual Machine Manager team, they're going along, they're iterating the next release of the product, for example. Maybe my integration pack doesn't have an activity that matches some new functionality they lit up. Well, with VMM being completely PowerShell based and scripting available, I can just plug that in and use these activities that may not be native to the IP, and so that's kind of my get out of jail free card. Same thing with the REST IP. If you'll see here, we've got a new REST IP, we've got the new Exchange user IP, we've got the FTP IP. So a lot of these IPs actually came out with the release of SP1. That really start to extend my data center even further. FTP, like we had mentioned. And then again, all of the different SystemCenter integration packs that we have. So those are the ones that we have for the SystemCenter components. And we will continue to iterate on those as we release versions of Orchestrator and also our integration packs.
Now, can you humor me for a second with your design window here? How easy is it to go and add something to an existing workflow? Can you just quickly show us that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if I go to, say at the end of this particular workflow for Virtual Machine Manager, I want to create an alert in Operations Manager that tells me, hey, after you add that vSphere, after you add this new read-only administrators and do all this fabric work against your VMM server, getting your roles, creating, sending emails, creating service windows, creating backups, maybe I want to add an alert to tell Operations Manager, hey, this thing's ready. You can see I just dragged the alert from the toolbar over here, dropped it in, checked in the workflow, and it's ready to run.
Awesome, that's really straightforward. I mean, it's almost like a Visio designer, right?
It's Visio on steroids if you look at kind of the automation in the data center.
Cool. Now, next integration piece, what about Windows Server?
Yeah, Windows Server, if you talk about all the native PowerShell commandlets that we would have with Windows Server, you've got modules for just about every function and every role that you would have on a Windows Server box. Simply use the .NET activities that you'll have, pick a PowerShell commandlet, and you can automate these workflows end to end. Adding roles, configuring roles, adding disks, removing disks, whatever you need to do against that Windows Server from a server management perspective, you can automate away with Orchestrator.
Awesome, great. Now, so you kind of touched on some of the scripting pieces here. You know, what happens if we have customers that already have existing scripts in their environment? Like, how easy is it to go and integrate a custom command, a VBS, something that you already have with automation? How do we build that together?
Yeah, it's really quite easy. You can use the OIT, which is our authoring space to write integration packs that allow you to have that kind of cascading dependencies where you'll select an object, you'll query a server, then you'll get all of its list of properties, so the next activity you can pick and you can kind of cascade downward. If not, one of the things we love to see is a lot of companies investing in their PowerShell modules going forward. Anybody that has and you'll see at the top of the screen, I've got an Amazon Web Services, for example. Do we have an integration pack for AWS? No. Is it easy to write using their commandlets? Absolutely. I wrote one in 10 minutes, allows me to manage EC2, RDS, S3, and IAM components across the board.
Wow. That's awesome. Now, how about other third-party systems? So, we have a lot of customers that are using, Dell for power management,
right.
HP for power management, Computer Associates, IBM for their help desk ticketing system.
Yep.
How do we fit in with both those hardware-based management as well as different software-based management pieces?
Yeah, the good one, if you look at the screen I've got now, Simon, I've got HP Operations Manager, IBM NetCool, vSphere, for example, the Amazon instance that we talked about. But natively, you've got the IPs listed on the right. And some of the workflows that I've built today, like if you look at HP Operations Manager, I can simply go in here and manage my HPOM instance, just like I could my SCOM instance. I can go in and manage my NetCool Omnibus instance. Again, the way that you build these is no different from building against any other workload. And the beauty of it is we have integrations pack for ILO. For HP, we have integrations pack that we see for HPOM, for NetCool, Omnibus. We've got a lot of these IPs that you can just download for free. Get them off the web, integrate them into your Orchestrator environment, build your workflows, and off you go.
That's awesome. I mean, really, for me with Orchestrator, kind of the bottom line about integration is, yes, you can integrate it. I mean, so long as there's a programmatic interface, we can go and tie it in with Orchestrator somehow. So what do I mean by programmatic interface? Well, that could be a function, an API, a way to speak to it through PowerShell, through command. The key thing that you want to keep in mind as you're starting to think about future hardware acquisitions, make sure that the management system for that piece of hardware or software, that component, is automatable, has a command line interface, no GUI. Let's say, for example, your storage management system requires you to actually go to a graphical user interface, click here, and click here to go and carve out a new SAN. Right. Guess what? That breaks automation.
Yes.
You want to stop thinking in this GUI world. Maybe it's simpler management, but start thinking in this automated world. And if you can have a series of commands that say, hey, connect to my storage, create a new SAN, carve it up, that's where we can have the automation. That's where we can simply just add it in the middle of a workflow. So as you start to run out of storage in one location, carve out some new storage from the SAN, and go and add it to that particular service. So key thing here, make sure that you have our automation in place. Make sure that any new hardware acquisitions do have some type of programmatic interface. Now, one other Orchestrator question, I think then we'll start to move on to another topic. Orchestrator is obviously kind of this critical component, right? It covers our automation, our regular activities. We need to ensure that these tasks fire when they need to.
Right.
What type of high availability or redundancy do we actually have for Orchestrator itself, and also those workflows running on Orchestrator?
Yeah, that's a good question, Simon. When you look at, we talked about being SQL-based, and so the always-on functionality in the new version of SQL supported in Orchestrator. So from the top level, you've got SQL protection kind of enabled there. Drop a DPM agent also to keep that thing.
There you go, backup and recovery.
Keep that thing healthy. The second tier is kind of the management server, and there's always just one management server. The nice thing about management servers, though, if that management server goes away for whatever reason, the only thing that will impact you from doing is actually designing or editing your runbooks. You can still stop jobs, start jobs, pause jobs, and resume jobs. The good thing about that next tier is the runbook worker layer. The runbook workers are fully redundant, and so if I have a workflow that says, hey, I want to run workflow A on Simon 1, Simon 1 goes offline for whatever reason, that workflow will automatically start on Simon 2. And you can also affinitize the runbook. So you can say, I want runbook A to only run on Simon 2. And so you can add a number of runbook workers. And you had touched earlier, Simon, I thought was interesting on the virtualization candidates within SystemCenter. When we talk about runbook workers, perfect candidate for virtualization.
Awesome. Well, let's move on a little, and we're still going to kind of stay in this services and automation theme, but now we're going to move on to Service Manager. And first question that I get asked a lot, and I'm actually just going to kind of address immediately, is what exactly is the CMDB?
Yep.
And why is that important? So the CMDB, we call this the Content Management Database. And essentially, it keeps track of all of the different objects in the environment. So things such as hardware, servers, laptops, networking components, wireless access points, IP addresses, literally anything in the environment. But more importantly, it keeps track of what those are connected to, what dependencies they have on this. Now, Service Manager, we talked about it as kind of this integrated platform for, configuring actions, sending off alerts. Service Manager also serves as the function of the help desk, kind of keep it a central inventory of problems alerts. And so while it's actually based on the Microsoft Operations Framework, or MOF, MOF is actually based on ITIL, one of our IT industry standard frameworks for data center management. And so essentially, as you kind of look at Service Manager, you're going to see it uses the same taxonomy and terminology as ITIL. You have things such as incidents, problems, release, problem management. So those kind of same terminology. And the CMDB aligns with that same set of information. Now, looking kind of historically about kind of the evolution in the data center, ITIL version 1 was really focused on server management. So making sure that a particular application runs on a particular server, and then the dependencies of that server. Moving forward to where we are today, ITIL version 2 and above, we're really now thinking of this in the concept of a service. As we've started to move towards these highly virtualized environments, we've really been able to kind of decouple a particular application from a particular server. So we're no longer thinking about what server does this app run on. We're now thinking about how do we run this service. And so a service is a collection of different VMs that keep something online. So maybe you're in the travel industry. Your particular line of business application, your service, maybe your actual booking and reservation system. Chances are that's no longer a single VM. That doesn't run on a single server, right? You're going to have some front end, some database, all these different business tiers and integration. And so now that we're thinking of this as far as the concepts of a service, we're thinking of this as the single entity we're trying to manage. And so back to the content management database. Let's say I need to go and update a router. Well, the CMDB is useful because it tells me what's using that router, what are the dependencies on that router. So as I go and work with that particular component, I can go through a series of change management, first figure out what's connected so that I can kind of plan this migration.
Nice.
So essentially, the CMDB is the central brain, the central database of our IT systems and our IT processes.
All of our assets, who owns them, what impact they might have, the dependencies, all that good stuff. Simon had a couple questions come in when you started talking about the CMDB. One of them that came in, actually came in twice. What is the Cloud Service Process Pack?
CSPP, good question. So the Cloud Services Process Pack, this is an out-of-band release which some of our Microsoft teams built to basically get people started with some of these new kind of private cloud concepts of automation and self-service. So, we had a lot of customers, once we first shipped Orchestrator, come to us and say, I love the idea, where do I get started, right? Or they say, hey, I need to start building this service catalog with Service Manager. Again, how do I get started, right? There's a lot of things, kind of guide me through the basics. Give me some examples. And so the CSPP is basically a collection of very common examples that you can go and install on your Orchestrator. So you add some runbooks such as deploy a new VM, clone a VM, kind of very basic operations
kind
to
of
show
the
how
fundamental,
to get started.
let's get going on this.
Exactly.
Nice.
And then similarly with Service Manager, we create several sample service requests for your self-service portal.
Nice.
So people can say, I need to provision more virtual machines. That type of example, very basic. But using these kind of templates, you can actually then almost work backwards using them as examples to go and build your own self-service portal, your own automation activities.
Kind of best practices, here's how you do it, here's how we hook in.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice.
And so it comes with everything connected. And again, that's a free download. You'll just search for Microsoft CSPP and you'll find the Cloud Services Process Pack.
Good, thanks, Simon. One question came in behind that one. Does the self-service catalog for Service Manager require any developer work or coding?
Good question. I know our IT pros are afraid,
shy away from it, but let's get started on this.
Don't be afraid of the code, because you don't have to be. Cool thing about Service Manager, we designed this interface with our IT pros in mind.
Nice. Meaning
that zero coding. You know what? Let's actually jump over to one of my demo systems. I think I can even show this better than kind of describing this.
Nice.
So SystemCenter Service Manager. So what I'm going to show you here, let me just log on to my demo system here. I'm going to connect to my Service Manager instance. And you know what? First of all, let me quickly just walk you through the Service Manager actual interface. Then let me actually jump into our service catalog, how we kind of build that, how we compose it. And you can see that it's entirely, GUI based as we go and build these different components. Of course, there is always backend PowerShell support and stuff like that. So we can automate this if we want. But we wanted to make it simple, make it GUI based. So here's actually SystemCenter Service Manager. To quickly walk you through the UI here, under our administration pane, this is where we go and set up things such as our connections to Operations Manager, to Orchestrator. So if we want to go and run a runbook, we have this connection in place. We have interaction with our management pack, security, other types of settings. Down under our configuration items, this essentially helps us build our CMDB. So as you can kind of see under the CMDB, we have things such as computers, software, updates, users, and then even things such as different builds. So as we're also thinking about, managing our IT infrastructure, we're not thinking about just deploying new servers and new pieces of hardware. We've also got to think about deploying new pieces of software.
Yes.
So if you have this ticketing system because you're a travel agency, version 1.1 is available. We still need that change control. So when we think about, hey, we're replacing this old version, upgraded it to the new version, how do these pieces still fit together?
Right.
The next category we have here is our library. Our library is essentially our collection of templates, other information that allows us to really build up these different types of runbooks and workflows. I'm going to jump back to this when I actually show you how we can build our service catalog. But final area is our work items. Our work item is essentially our ITIL-based management system, our management framework, where we can service the centralized help desk. So under here, we can see any activity that's happening in the environment. Our change management, that kind of covers any time we'll do a change to our hardware, our inventory, such as replacing that router.
So these are alerts that might come in because I'm connecting into SCOM, and Service Manager has a process that you've defined to say, hey, you know what, I know how to handle this particular incident. Let it go through the change request processes, the approval processes, fire it off, and it's done.
Absolutely. As we think of these large enterprise environments, it's probably not a single guy or even a single team that's going to go and update one part of the data center, right? Because you're going to have network, storage, the SQL guys, the virtualization guys. And so as you're thinking about doing change management, let's say, replacing a router, we still need to think about how that impacts the VMs, how that impacts the networking, how that is physically connected. So using change management, even though it's not kind of a software-based change, it's still a series of steps that needs to be managed across different teams. So this allows us to kind of centralize that information.
Nice.
Incident management refers to a single problem that causes some type of service interruption. So let's say my website crashes. That's called an incident. Our goal is to resolve this incident as quick as possible, bring the website back online. We close the incident. But there's still an underlying problem that causes that incident, right? Even though we fix that one-time service outage, it'll happen again next week, next week.
Post-mortem maybe and kind of see what...
So that's what the problem management really focuses on. It's what is the root cause of these incidents we see. So think of an incident as kind of a subset of a problem. 20 incidents is the same root problem. And so as we go and fix a problem, that might include dev research, coding. That might be more involved
output,
to solve.
whatever.
Exactly. So again, a series of IT processes that we can still kind of coordinate.
Nice.
Down here we have our release management. And so this is as we're doing our updates to different pieces of software. So change management is generally hardware-based fixes and upgrades. Release management is software. So you're updating your VMs, your enterprise apps. This can also be things such as you're rolling out Windows 8 across your entire environment. You need the help desk to kind of keep track of that software roll-up. Maybe you do one domain first, kind of pilot that, then do the next. And so even through software-based releases, this release management allows us to have a structured process.
A nice staggered,
as we roll
controlled,
out. Exactly.
Audited.
Control.
Yes.
Audited. And we always keep track of any change we do, right? So you're never at the point like, oh, did I get all of the laptops in the environment or most of them? You could get that kind of definitive answer.
The audit piece, too, is kind of big, too, Simon. When you look at, like, who made what change? Who made this approval? And I'm able to get all that in the SM portal as well?
Absolutely, yeah. We always keep track of who made the change, who made the approval.
Nice.
We have things that you can carve up, such as the person that created the request, the person that approved the request.
Nice.
So there's always a history associated with any process, any series of actions, so you can track the changes.
Very good.
Then the final category under work item is our service request fulfillment. And so this is our integration with the self-service portal where someone says, hey, something for you to do. Okay, let me review it, approve or reject. So maybe they're onboarding a new user. Maybe they need to get their laptop repaired. Maybe they need to scale out a resource. There's all these different options where you can basically have this customized catalog. They make a request. This is where you see that centralized list of approvals.
Nice.
But now back to the question of this catalog. Let's actually take a look in our library. And I'll quickly show you how we can kind of construct these different service requests, but without any code again.
Nice.
We got to keep this simple, right? Stay away from the codes. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go down to our service catalog. Now under here you see these two categories. You see a request offering and a service offering. These are very similar. Generally, a service offering is a collection of requests. So let's say, for example, a service offering might be network, a broad category. Within that network, you might have a request offering for speed up my connection, request offering, I want another NIC on this server. So it's kind of the requests and individual components within that broad service category.
Got it.
So as I go and take a look at our existing request offerings, I have a few that are built already that I will show you here. So here's our Talking Heads incident. So let's actually take a look at this particular request. So I have an application called Talking Heads.
Okay.
That's going to be my service, my category.
Right.
Within that, there's a particular problem with it, a particular instance. Let's actually take a look at this form that we're going to present to users on a website and see how we went and built this. So here's our incident name. And down here, you see this is the prompts. So rather than having to write in code, please enter the title, whack n, all of that HTML, JavaScript,
right.
whatever you guys, whatever those devs guys do here. We simply have a prompt, type in the actual text, whether it's required, optional, and then the prompt type. Is it a text box? Is it a radio button? Is it a drop down? You then get to enter what type of input the user should be adding. Should it be a string? Should it be a phone number? Should it be an email address? So we could still kind of do some dynamic filtering to make sure that the input parameter was correct.
This is standardized, Simon. I mean, when you talk about standardization, I mean, this is kind of a perfect example of kind of what I'm seeing here.
Absolutely, it's a template.
For the automation piece.
You get these 5 questions.
Predictable.
And so our goal here, right, when we get this, here's our change request. So I haven't made a change for a while, but you can see anything we do gets tracked in the history. Now, this standardization, again, critical component with our private cloud story, right? If they go and make this service request, hey, there's something wrong with Talking Heads, the way we kind of want to think about this is it's going to a restaurant and you have a menu. You open up the menu, you have 10 options, okay?
Right.
This isn't Burger King, you don't get it your way, okay? You have these 10 options, you enter the first box, second box, third box, and submit that to the IT guys. You can have automatic approval even.
Yeah.
And again, it's the standardization that streamlines the process. There's no longer picking up the phone, going back and forth on emails, asking questions. We ask the information up front, get it immediately.
Right, right.
Now extending this, so we've had our request offering, which is, there's an incident. Let's actually look at the service offering as a whole here. And so this is my broad category, my all-inclusive category of what's included as part of this offering. So as I scroll down here, I get to enter information and look, here's this one request offering. So again, the request offering, part of the service offering. But let's actually take a look at this within our self-service portal and see what the end user experience is.
Nice.
Now I'm going to switch from my first server over to my operations manager one because I'm logged in with my end user here.
Nice.
And so basically this service manager portal, this is our self-service catalog. This is built on top of Silverlight. And what you get here is I'm logged in as user. So I'm just, the developer that's reporting a problem, right? I don't understand how the infrastructure works. I just need to make a request.
Right. This is where our end users go. This is where you've directed them. Maybe you've got some IE builds that have the automatic link in the build that says, "Hey, I need help," kind of like we have with
Click
MS
here.
Web or IT Web. Click here, and this is their experience.
Exactly. And one important thing to note here, you can see this is based on a web portal, on a website. So what this means is our users, they don't actually have to go in and log into Service Manager and see all that information, all the interface. As a web-based portal, pretty standard to use, pretty straightforward to use here. They click on this, they'll get a list of information saying, hey, what are all these different prompts that we want to go and add?
And you, as the admin on the back end, you're driving kind of what that experience is like for my end users.
I get to define those parameters.
Nice.
And again, as we showed here, we can do all of this without any coding.
Nice.
Well, let's go ahead and let's start to move on towards some of our infrastructure areas. I'm going to take the first question and ask that over to you. The first question that we get is around managing different types of service. And there's one particular SKU of note that people always ask about, and we've already got some questions coming up here. That is HyperV Server 2012. What are our remote management options for this? And you know what, maybe let me first quickly just address what HyperV Server is, and then we kind of talk about the remote management options. So HyperV Server is a completely free download. It's basically a Hyper-V host with full virtualization rights, full cluster rights, but nothing else comes on the box. And let me say that one more time, it's free. Go to Microsoft.com/HVS. It'll take you to a link to download. And basically, it's our Hyper-V host. There's no licenses required for the host. Now, if whatever you go and run inside the guest operating system, you still need a license for the guest OS. So we just provide that host-based license. And so a lot of people say, well, why are you giving away Windows Server for free? It's not Windows Server. Let me clarify that. It is HyperV Server. And so it does not come with Active Directory. It does not come with DNS, DHCP,
Very
file service,
workload.
IIS. It comes with Hyper-V role and full support of all the different clustering features.
Nice.
So it still supports the full scale of 64 node clusters, 8,000 virtual machines, but again, just that host-based operating system. So one other trade-off with that, or why would people use it? It's built on server core, basically using that minimum shell. And so what that means is when you log in, you don't get the full graphical user interface.
Right.
You get basically a version of the command prompt. It's actually tweaked specifically for Hyper-V Server. So it has actually some nice options. Option 1, provide a name. Option 2, join a domain. So it kind of steps you through without giving you that full requirement for command prompt. But a lot of people, they get afraid of that. They're like, oh no, it's going to be too much scripting. So we want to kind of talk about the remote management capabilities that you have here. So why would you go and use Hyper-V Server? Let me answer that other question that we get as well. So not only is it free, which is great for you guys, but it has a minimal installation footprint. So not only does that mean that the actual size for the OS is smaller, but that means that there's fewer components that need servicing. Right? We're no longer including IIS. There's no Internet Explorer, right? There's none of these components that often need a lot of patches. So if there's fewer components to service, it means there's fewer patches. Fewer patches, fewer reboots. Fewer reboots, less downtime. So as far as Hyper-V hosts go, we definitely want to recommend and encourage our users using Hyper-V Server so they can get these advantages of fewer patching, fewer reboot, maintain that higher service availability and continuity.
Nice.
Now, that was a long answer when it was your question here. So back to your question, what are our remote management capabilities that we have?
Yeah, it's good. Simon, you touched on the core piece of the hypervisor, and when talking at industry events, talking to customers, they're starting to really come around with the core piece without the GUI. And you nailed it when you talk about kind of it's a very dedicated, very specific, very lightweight. Let's give at least amount of possible to the actual host, so we can spin off all these resources to our guest VMs, designed perfectly for that. But when we talk about management, the remote server administration tools, failover cluster manager, we can manage hypervisors with VMM. You've got the HyperV Manager itself, and then last but certainly not least, PowerShell. Full-blown when you talk about when you get to that server, domain join it, give it a local admin, give it maybe an IP address, it's ready to go. When you talk about PowerShell, fully automated, new VM, new disk, add VM, configure VM, new network, VLAN ID equals. A lot of the PowerShell commandlets fully automatable against that core.
Yeah, I think you named 5 different remote management capabilities.
Right.
So I guess the message here is, don't be afraid of Hyper-V Server because there's no GUI, there's no shell.
Right.
Not only do you have this full remote management capabilities, there's actually a bunch of third parties that provide add-ons, so specifically for storage management, where they'll go and give you a GUI on Hyper-V Manager. So even beyond the remote management, work with these third parties, browse online, there's a lot of different options available. So don't be afraid of the core, it's good stuff.
Simon, I had a question for you, kind of on the tail end of that. Does it support the new types of live migration?
Absolutely. So Virtual Machine Manager supports all the different Windows Server 2012 new types of live migration. So live migration, of course, is moving a virtual machine from one host to another with 0 downtime to the VM. Now with Server 2012, we now have what we call storage live migration. And that means we keep the VM running in a single location. But we can actually move the back-end storage between different SANs, different arrays with 0 downtime to the VM. And then we can move our VMs actually out of clusters now. So in the past, the boundary of a live migration was a cluster. 2012, we now extend beyond that.
Nice.
So you can live migrate between two standalone hosts. Standalone to cluster, cluster to cluster, standalone to standalone. So pretty much you have full mobility throughout the data center. So, people say, hey, a cluster goes to 64 nodes. Well, really, our boundary can really extend because you can move things from one cluster to a different cluster now.
And Simon, what I do that I love the idea of live migration. I know a lot of customers use it. So does that give me the ability, if I have 100 VMs running on a guest and I think there is a better candidate for hosting those VMs, I can move them off without impacting those VMs running at all?
Absolutely, yeah. That's the goal of live migration. One thing to keep in mind with live migration, it's for planned maintenance. And why I say that is both of the servers that participate in the live migration process need to be online and active for that entire process, because you're actually copying the in-state memory that's running on one host over to another host. And so again, if you're doing maintenance, you say, hey, I need to kind of distribute my traffic, do some load balancing, or I'm going to go and put this server into maintenance because I need to go and add a new NIC. We can gracefully live migrate everything off, no downtime for the services, do our repairs, bring it online, and then we can fail everything back.
Hey Simon, that's a good answer. I'm looking online and I'm getting a lot of questions too. Actually, 3 came in about this. Different ways to ask, but people are asking about service templates. What are they? What can you put into them? How is this contextually related to a virtual machine manager? Tell me about that a little bit.
Great. Okay, so service templates. First of all, I like to define service templates, kind of with the same concept of, evolution of the data center. So as we kind of look 3-5 years ago, everything was moving to virtual machines. And essentially what a VM does, it decouples that application that's running in the VM from the underlying physical infrastructure, right? And that's how we got this live migration where we can move it freely. But now as we start to really try to scale up and we start to look at these enterprise applications, let's go back to this travel booking system, for example. Guess what? It's not a single VM.
Right.
We often see these deployed as multi-tiers, multiple virtual machines on each tier. The most common topology or design that we talk about is one with the 3 tiers. Our front tier being kind of our website that our clients actually connect to, process information. So there's kind of like a hosted tier that would be a nice candidate for load balancing. Our back-end tier is often our database tier, so that's contacting our SQL database, actually getting the data. And then we have this middle tier in between, which is where our business intelligence lives, our IIS server. It's kind of like our brain of this end-to-end application. And so as we go and say, hey, I need to go and deploy a new version of this collection of VMs, we want to be able to manage that as a single logical unit. And so this is where this concept of services come in. It allows us to group a collection of virtual machines together, their associated hardware, storage, networking resources, which could include load balancers even, and deploy that as a single unit. So, hey, my enterprise travel booking system is getting really popular. Okay, let me just go deploy a clone, and everything is already pre-configured and standardized.
Some standardization there that you've been touching on a couple times.
But you know what? Let me actually jump into a demo and kind of show you how we compose that. I think that's more effective here. So as I go onto my demo machine, right now I'm showing Virtual Machine Manager 2012 Service Pack 1. And I'm going to go down to our library. Our library basically has a collection of all these different components in the environment. And first thing I'm going to show you I'm basically going to show you how we can compose this service using multiple tiers. So we're going to do everything based on templates as well. Again, we want to do these templates, right? Get the standardization and consistency. It helps us with our sizing, it helps us with our planning, future budget utilization, everything.
And even in the portal, when we talk about self-service users, you can define kind of what your users would see with regards to these service templates as well?
Absolutely. So with our app control, the self-service portal for VMM, we actually have the ability to scope what an individual user or a user group can see and have access to.
Offloaded some of that work to your other admins.
Absolutely, yep.
Nice.
So what I'm going to show you here as we go through the library is, first thing, I'm going to show you what we call profiles. Now, a profile we break down into 6 different categories. And essentially a profile is a mini template for one piece of the VM.
Got it.
So what we're going to look at here are our applications, our guest OS, our hardware, and our SQL profiles. Now, our application profile, this is essentially saying what type of application is going to run within this VM. And so within this application profile, we can actually add AppV packages, virtual application packages, and say every time we deploy this component for this VM, it includes this application.
Nice.
We can include things such as SQL DAC packs here, and include things such as the account information, authentication type. We can include scripts. And so what this means, if I build a VM using this application, it's going to come with that AppV package, that SQL DAC pack, those scripts with it.
Every time.
Every time.
Consistent.
Absolutely. Now, next thing we'll look at is our guest OS profile. And this is essentially saying, what are we actually going to put inside the VM? Okay. So this is the guest operating system.
Got it.
And up here, we get to customize this again. What is the actual OS that we're using? What type of identity information? So when I go and deploy this particular, an instance of this particular template, we can go and index it and say first one will be conweb 01, conweb 02, etc. So we could kind of automate the instancing throughout this deployment, so we're not having to worry about what version is this, how do I manage the numbers.
I could almost read from unattend files. I can specify the domain I want to join. I
Absolutely.
want to give the computer name equals whatever.
Yep, so we have all the built-in scripting support. So you can have answer files, you can have GUI run once files.
Nice,
so
nice.
first time you booted it might do some different processing.
Nice.
But then you also get to specify what roles and features will be deployed as part of this. So this is going to be my, my web server, so we can see that I've already pre-configured IIS.
Nice.
And so what this means is rather than deploy the VM, then have to log into it, configure everything, install the IIS server,
Right.
maybe have to do a reboot, this gets built before it's even deployed.
On the fly.
On the fly, so
Nice.
it's already going to be configured, already ready for you. Next thing we're going to look at is the hardware profile. And so this is basically the hardware for that particular VM. So this is the virtualized hardware.
Okay.
And so what we'll look at here, let's go back to our web one. This is actually going to take a look at basically what you would see through HyperV Manager, our hardware configuration.
Nice, consistent experience.
Consistent UI, exactly.
No
So you
learning
manage it the
curve,
same way
ready to
you
go.
would with Hyper-V.
Nice.
So you set your memory, your processes, the IDE connections, SCSI connections, whether it's going to be highly available or not, meaning do I go and deploy this on a cluster every time? Virtual NUMA. You can change the dynamic memory settings as well here. So this is basically what the actual VM hardware profile will look like.
Nice.
Then the final one here is a SQL Server profile. So this means that if we're going to have a VM that's going to be running SQL, let's go and give it some advanced SQL configuration information. So who are the users? What type of connections do we have? What type of service accounts are going to access it? So it's kind of our detailed SQL information.
And this is great for those machines you would have on that tier on the back end.
That's right, yep.
So I've got a nice consistent build experience build out for my middle tier web services, kind of that business logic. I've got a nice scale out application ready to go for my back end SQL ready to go. All templatized, consistent.
That's right. Well, let's take this to the next step. So what I showed you just now are the different components that will make up a single virtual machine. So let's actually look up what that virtual machine looks like as we put everything together.
Nice.
And so under that, we call that our VM template. So I'm going to go ahead and actually create one for you. Now again, this isn't a particular VM, this is a template of a VM.
Okay.
So I could go and deploy this template 1,000 times if I want. And as I go and build this template, first thing it's going to say is, what's going to be your underlying actual VHD file or OS. I know what, I actually have some VMDK files that I imported from VMware, so let's even use a VMDK file as our underlying actual VHD or underlying storage for this virtualization infrastructure. So one thing that you'll see, and definitely get those VMware questions coming in, you're just going to see some great integration between the product, allowing SystemCenter to go manage VMware. So that was just one example here.
Absolutely.
So we select our source template, and so let's call this MVA Live QA. Now, this is where we then get to select those different pieces of the profile. So remember, all of these components, the application, plus the guest OS, plus the guest hardware, plus the SQL Server, those are what we make into a VM template.
The blocks are building now this template.
Exactly.
And you're going to do something with this template.
And then we'll go create VMs out of it,
Nice.
or even create a service out of it, go a
Nice,
step further.
nice.
So under here, it's saying, what's your hardware configuration? So I can go set it up from scratch, or let's go and actually select that hardware profile that I just picked. Click Next. What's our guest OS? Let's go ahead and select one of those guest OS profiles that we just picked. So again, we're basically going through and building a VM from these different pieces these different templates that we've already created. And so again, it's the standardization. And let's say you want to go and deploy a similar instance. Well, we can still deploy similar instances using the same templates and make a tweak on the fly. So for example, this is going to be my application, my application profile. You know what? Maybe I don't want the 64-bit edition of Server 2012 stated. I need to use Data Center. I can still change that on the fly based on an original
tweak, ready to go.
Exactly. Oh, it's saying that it's not compatible for this particular OS, so no problem. Let's just go back.
Some nice consistency checking on the fly as well.
Consistency check-in. Here we go. We'll select this template, and then finally our SQL backend.
Nice.
So yeah, what you saw from those errors, it said there's some inconsistency since I was picking these random profiles. One of them had one version of the guest OS, different versions that were non-compatible. So it kind of flagged me as I was building this template.
Nice.
Hey, you've added some inconsistent things
Rather
here.
than after the fact.
We're going to stop you up front. Exactly.
Right.
So click our SQL Server, click Next. And now, one thing you're always going to notice every time you go and build a wizard using the VMM components, you get this button for View Script.
That is awesome.
So tell us the benefits. You're Mr. Automation.
You know, Simon, when I first started playing around with VMM years ago, and I saw them introduce this capability, and then when I got into the automation team and being able to run PowerShell commandlets, the beauty of this is some of the workflows that I have that I'll show you guys. I'll show you in just a little bit. Again, maybe there's something that the integration pack doesn't support, some activity. Well, if you've got that, I can simply take that script, establish a connection to my VMM server, paste that script into a .NET PowerShell activity, run it again, run it against some command I may get in Service Manager, some request I may get out of Service Manager, run it manually, run it on some other trigger, run it in response to an alert I may get in SCOM. That's the beauty of that automation piece. I mean, and the fact that the VMM team built their UI on top of PowerShell, wonderful. From an automation perspective, I couldn't ask for more.
It's great. If you want to go deploy 100 hosts with the same step, save the script, run a small script adjusting, my server name -1, -2, etc., and just help speed everything up here. So a lot of automation built throughout the product. Even in our GUI, there's automation.
Yes.
Very cool stuff.
Yes.
So I'm going to click Create. We're going to see the job spin up. And you see me take those different individual pieces, build a VM template. Now, as we said, we're no longer in the days of just VMs. We're in the days of these multi-tiered virtual machines. And so once I built a VM, next step is taking a collection of VMs and building this multi-tier service that we can manage as that single logical unit.
Nice.
So as I kind of go up the stack here, I can click on Service Template. Let's actually just open up an existing one. So what this does, this gives us the settings, dependencies, what does this template depend on. But the way I always like to do this is actually looking at the designer view. This is where it will actually show us in a graphical user interface how this is configured.
Nice.
So let me just quickly adjust the view. And so you can see this is my multi-tiered application. I have my, let's see which tier this is. So we have, looks like our web tier on the left, our middle business logic, our integration tier in the middle, our SQL tier on the back end. So on my web tier, I can see that I've got a AppV package, 64 bits of Windows, my hardware requirements. My middle tier, I have my AppV middle tier. Similar information. On the back end, I have my SQL DAC pack here, and then my SQL configuration information.
OS, disks, joining which domain, how they're talking to
usernames,
each
accounts,
other,
password,
and I see you've got all your network info down there at the bottom
and that's
as well.
the next thing I want to show you. When we go and actually deploy this, configure it, we want it all to be connected, right? We don't want these servers just to be ghosts hanging around, and so we can actually pre-configure the actual connections as well here as part of that. If we had load balancers, we could actually add a load balancer as part of this deployment as well, a software-based load balancer. And so when we went and pushed out this broad instance, it would have built-in load balancing as part of that.
Or if I'm adding to an existing, I've added this resource into this pool.
Absolutely.
Load balanced out, ready to go.
We do have the ability to go and adjust scale on these. So what you can see here, as we go and click on one of these tiers, you see a lot of different properties down here. You can see what order does this application have to start up in. It's going to start up third, so we can get our back-end database running, our middle business logic, then finally our web front end, so we don't have clients connecting before the database is ready. And then we have the option to actually scale out this tier down here. And so what this means is, if this is reaching over capacity, there's more users hitting it than it can support healthily, then we can actually say it can automatically scale out to 2, 3, 4.
Nice and elastic.
5 tiers,
that
exactly.
Elasticity is I think the piece in IT that a lot of people really are migrating to. Pay for what you use. If I have an application that needs more compute resources, scale it out. If they're not going to use, throttle them back.
Scale it back and repool those resources,
Nice.
reallocate them
Let
to
them
another
do something
component.
else.
Exactly.
Great automation play there, Simon.
There you go, there you go. So that was a quick overview of the service templates. Hopefully, seeing those different components get put together, just basically see the profiles, build a VM, the VMs build a service template, you can see how we can kind of conceptually really work on this theme of standardization throughout the data center.
Good. Hey, Simon, I had another question come in from the United States. Is there any VM load distribution based on host utilization, and does it still require SCOM? I remember the whole Pro and then dynamic optimization.
Great
How does
question.
that?
So let me quickly walk through a bit of a history lesson with some of our integration here. So in our previous release, 2008 R2, we had what we would call load distribution. Kind of load balancing for the VMs. And so what that actually meant was we would move these different virtual machines to different physical hosts so that the memory, the CPU, the disk I/O, the network I/O on one of those hosts wasn't overwhelmed. And basically we would be monitoring this. Once we hit a threshold, let's say 80% memory utilization.
Okay.
That would go, Ops Manager would say, hey, your host has reached 80% memory, and then Ops Manager would send a command to VMM and say, VMM, go live migrate this.
Got it.
And VMM has logic built in called intelligent placement that basically says, when I'm moving a VM somewhere, what is the most important metric to me? Is it free memory? And so most of our users, most of our applications, it's memory based.
So you can define that.
You can define what's most important to you and your host.
Nice.
But you could also, we have a lot of SQL users, and for them, oftentimes disk I/O is the most important factor if they have a heavy SQL database, highly transactional. And so for those applications, they may say, hey, what's most important for me when I do intelligent placement is disk I/O. We also have networking and CPU as other options. But what this basically means, the host gets overutilized, hits a threshold. Operations Manager detects it. Operations Manager tells VMM, go move it to the best available host. Now, what's changed in 2012 is we now have the ability to remove Operations Manager as a dependency. We found a lot of customers that only had VMM. They wanted to take advantage of this feature, but didn't want to have to go and deploy Operations Manager.
That's where the Pro integration came in, right?
That was Pro. That
Okay,
Pro is called Performance and Resource Optimization, and that's that tie-in between Operations Manager and VMM.
Nice, nice.
So again, we've dropped that dependency this release, and so we could get this full load balancing, and we call this dynamic optimization. And so essentially, you can look at hosts, you can look at VMs and say, hey, I want to load balance this, I'm going to use dynamic optimization, and this will then, VMM itself, just look at the different hosts, move things around. And it's configurable by what is called aggressiveness. So kind of an interesting term there. Aggressiveness, so when you're trying to do even load distribution, there's a trade-off of trying to get it exactly balanced across all of the hosts, which would require more movement, right, to always try to keep it balanced, versus having it slightly staggered.
Okay.
And so basically aggressiveness means how close to exactly even do you want it? The more aggressive you have to having it balanced means the more live migrations, because you're constantly trying to allocate the load. Hence more network traffic.
Sure.
So depending on your host utilization, you might not need them 50% balanced exactly across all the servers. It might be okay to have some staggering as the trade-off of less live migration, which means less processing, less network traffic.
And the option's there for you to determine what's the best fit.
Exactly.
And this is where I see 1 star, 3 stars.
That is that star rating that you see when you actually go and take a look at a host.
Nice.
Now, one other thing to add on here. Pro is still around. This performance and resource optimization, this integration with Ops Manager, it's still around and still very useful. But what we can do now is we can basically look at different triggers and then make alerts based on those different triggers. So dynamic optimization, the VMM only component, that just looks at like host memory and moves things around based on memory. But maybe you want to do make a change based on the number of users that are logged onto a server. So completely random, arbitrary, information you need.
Right.
You can use Ops Manager to detect that information, how many users are logged on. Once they reach a threshold, let's say 10 users, it will then go kick that alert to VMM. VMM will live migrate, do the load balancing, still using that intelligent placement.
Nice.
So the way you want to think about it, if you're just doing load balancing based on memory, all you need is dynamic optimization. If you want to do load balancing based on other triggers, you can integrate it with any of Ops Manager's other triggers, but you do then have that dependency on Operations Manager.
Nice and extensible, kind of what you said with kind of tuning that Pro MP. You want to take a recovery, you want to take a diagnostic. What are some of the remediation steps that you might want to do against that Pro?
Absolutely.
Nice, nice. Simon, one more questions, or actually a couple more questions are coming in with regards to VMM.
Okay.
The next one is, how does VMM integrate with third-party hosters?
Oh, good question. Hosting is becoming an increasingly, common scenario that we're seeing, large hosters. And a lot of that is all these efficiencies that we've now tried to start building into Windows Server, System Center, and integration up to Azure. Microsoft, we've been running our cloud services for almost 20 years with our email. And, we're essentially becoming the, authority at running these large data center services. And so in this release, we've actually built a lot of these best practices for our massive services like MSN, Xbox Live, these multi-million user services that require massive data center infrastructure and integration down into our products. And so essentially what you're going to see here is we're building now a lot of features for hosters. And we consider hosters, one of our larger customers, right? They're the guys that are running 10,000 servers, 20,000 servers.
Right.
And so they do really need the scale, this automation that System Center provides.
Huge data centers.
Now, what this means is, while most of our customers out here probably don't work for a hoster, we want to tell you that you can now take advantage of the hoster when you need to scale out capacity. So, we've always, the last couple of years, we've talked about scaling out capacity using public cloud, say Windows Azure. Sure. There's some countries that Windows Azure just isn't available in. Right. So how do these customers scale out? Well, they can then use these third-party hosters. Any hoster, there's many of them out there, thousands of them out there that just have spare data center space. And what we can do is we can now scale out our services, our VMs, our applications to those data centers, but monitor them through System Center, manage them through System Center itself. And so, this is kind of a big change from the past, because previously, if you went and deployed an application over in someone else's data center, you would have to use their management tools.
Yes.
You'd have to use their documentation, their monitoring tools. And so you didn't have the same level of visibility, and it didn't necessarily integrate in your current system, right? So what we've essentially done is we've allowed our hosters to basically, they're using REST, which is REST and OData, which are industry standard protocols. We basically allow them to add modules to their data center. These data center modules connect to my own System Center, and so through my System Center, I can see what my VMs in their data center are doing. I can deploy my VMs in their data center. I can monitor my health of my apps in their data center. So it's almost extending my data center to use their resources, but still get that centralized monitoring.
So I still have the same kind of look, feel, accessibility that I have for workloads that I might have traditionally on my enterprise, in my data center, but they just happen to live somewhere else.
Absolutely. And in fact, I got a demo here that I'm going to jump to, and actually I'm connected to, it's actually not a real hoster, it's another lab over in Microsoft, but I'm basically using them as my sample hoster.
Nice.
And so what I'm going to show you in this demo is actually our self-service portal. So this is kind of a good demo here because we get to touch another component. What I'm going to do is actually go and deploy a service, one of my services, in my hoster's data center. So let me show you App Controller here. So this is a web-based interface. Now again, App Controller is our self-service portal for VMM.
Yes.
For our infrastructure, our VMs, our services, our clusters. And so what I'm doing here is I'm signed in as an end user, and I'm now going to go and deploy my service into someone else's data center, right? I'm a developer. I don't understand how VMM works. I just need a nice, simple web-based interface to go and spin up my VM somewhere else because we're out of capacity. So let me just first quickly walk you through here. Here's an overview telling us everything that's connected. Now, App Controller also connects to Azure. So we could go spin up in Azure. We can go spin up with our third party.
Nice.
So as I take a look at our clouds, which are a collection of basically a collection of resources.
That's good. A question came in on what is a cloud?
Oh, you know what? Well, let me actually go and answer that now. So concepts of a cloud, this is a term that's been used a lot recently, right?
Yes.
Some of us say, hey, play a drinking game. Every time they say cloud, take a drink,
Right.
It's so commonly used
Makes
here.
for a long night.
Makes for a long night. So hopefully our attendees over in Europe can have some fun now. So as we go and build a cloud, essentially this is our collection of all of our data center resources. It's our aggregation of everything in the data center. So storage, network, computers, clusters, and basically this is our pool of resources. Going back to this concept of what is a cloud, what are the definitions? It's a pool of compute resources, right? But with these clouds, what we can then do is basically carve them up for different usage, different people, different engineering projects. And within those smaller clouds, that's where we can set things like capacity limits.
Nice.
So some examples that I see, we have customers that have multiple data centers. They might have one in Seattle, they might have one over in Moscow. Two different countries. And as they're going and managing these data centers, they have different admins that are responsible for just the Seattle one, just the Moscow one.
Right.
And so as these local admins are doing things, we don't necessarily want them to go and touch something in the other data center. So we take our large cloud, which is all of our corporate resources, have a smaller cloud for Seattle, have a smaller cloud for Moscow, and then say this admin only can touch this cloud, this admin can only touch this cloud.
Good. So the scenario, if I'm a development shop and I hire a couple new devs, they come into the organization, these devs need compute resources, I can have a cloud for new devs.
Absolutely, and actually doing that organizational breakdown is another great example. That's another way we see these customers use these clouds. You know, because within a cloud, you can also allocate different types of hardware.
Nice.
So for example, we might have a cloud for our engineering or our research and development. That's going to have, you know, the fastest storage, fastest networks, you know, kind of our gold level of service. Right. You know, at the same time, if we're highly virtualized, we're probably going to have all of our human resources department running in VMs. Lower priority, not business critical. If they go down for 30 minutes, you know, we're not losing money, right? And so that's the type of thing where you could say, okay, this cloud's slower storage, fewer VMs. And so you could basically say users within our engineering org, you get to scale up, use all the fast things. Users within HR, limited amount of capacity, you get the slower hardware.
Here's your slice, here's my slice, here's their slice.
It's exactly that, carving it up, but also offering capacity control and also access control. What are the different actions?
Nice, nice.
And so back to the app controller demo here. What you're actually going to see is as I'm an end user, I only have limited action. I only have access to a few clouds. I don't have access to everything in my whole environment. And so as I look at this cloud view here, we actually have 3 different private clouds set up. I have a private cloud for my deployment, for my production, and for my staging. So my staging is probably going to be kind of the slower stuff. I then have some Windows Azure connections, 3 different subscriptions here. So development, production, staging. And even within Azure, you know, I've carved it out by providing larger storage, better SQL instances for my production environment.
You don't care where these workloads live.
I don't. To me, it doesn't matter, right? Things are no longer bound to a particular server. We're in this virtualized world, abstracting
That's the beauty
everything.
of it.
Exactly. And so we take this a step further by now saying, hey, we have a cloud up in Fabricant hosting, my hosting partner. So when I don't have local capacity or I can't use Azure, I could go scale out over with my third party. So if I look at some of the VMs that I already have up and running, you can see I have a few in my private cloud, already got 2 up with my hoster, and 4 over in Windows Azure.
Nice.
Now, the next thing is our services. So remember, our service, this is this multi-tiered application that we manage as a single logical unit. You can see all of the different services that I have up and running here as this end user. So I can actually go, you know, take a look at a service, and I see, hey, here's a 2-tier service. Cool, so I get this visibility of how everything looks like, but as the end user, I didn't have to go and configure this. The next time I want an instance, it gets deployed the same way. Again, I don't have to think about the underlying HyperV networking, any of that stuff.
Let your devs hang out in Visual Studio and not changing network
That's exactly it.
on a NIC.
That's exactly it. And you know what? You know, this really helps our developers stay happier because they do what they signed up to do, write code. This helps our infrastructure guys stay happier because they do what they signed up to do, manage the infrastructure. You know, less of this customer service, less of, hey, is it a problem in your code? You know, trying to figure out where these problems
The network
were.
guys blaming the devs, devs blaming the network guys.
Vice versa. This kind of helps, again, it's this concept of standardization. It just builds inefficiency and eliminates friction within the data center here.
Nice.
So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click deploy, and I'm going to go and actually deploy a service to Fabricant, my third-party hoster. So it simply says, what cloud are you going to use for this deployment? I can see I have a big data center. They're not giving me any capacity limitations. What template are you going to use? So I'll use my basic Windows Server 2012 template. Then finally, I need to specify unique information for this as well. You know, now we've built a template, but how do I connect to that particular instance, right? So that's the kind of the third step here, where we need to go and provide actual naming information for our virtual machines. Enter that, and we can see it's set. So now, click deploy, and we can see that our virtual machine manager deployment has started.
Nice.
So that's basically, app controller. It's the self-service portal. And so how can we take advantage of hosters? Key thing here is you don't have to be a hoster to take advantage of these features. You can work with another hoster to take advantage of these features. I get that single, pane of glass, that single view from that single location.
Nice. Simon, a question came in I just read that was pretty similar to what you're talking about. Question was simply, is it possible, which I think you just did, to do a live migration across platforms such as between Hyper-V, VMware, or Azure?
Good question. Let me clarify that. So the answer to that basically is no, not cross-platform live migration. So let me clarify some terminology here. Live migration means you're moving the VM with zero downtime. Okay, so the VM stays online and running. Migration means it could go off, you copy things, you change things around, then you bring it back on. So to clarify, we do support migrations. We do not support live migration. Now, the reason why we cannot support this cross-platform live migration, either from VMware to Hyper-V, to Citrix, to Windows Azure, is because the actual underlying file system, file infrastructure is different. So let's even assume that we have the same Intel processor on VMware, the same Intel processor on Hyper-V, where these two, in theory, can use the same memory blocks, memory patterns. VMware still has all of its files on a VMFS file structure. Hyper-V, probably on cluster shared volume, CSV. So even if the memory can copy, that data writes are still going to be inconsistent. So to answer the question, no. There are innate technical challenges in all of the products. It's not just a Hyper-V problem.
Right.
You can't go Hyper-V back to VMware either. It's an innate architectural design thing where they're using underlying file systems, different migration technology to copy the data. So bottom line is no, you cannot live migrate between these different platforms.
It's actually a good segue.
Yeah, I've seen one or two questions already come up here about regular migration here. So I know that you've actually kind of showed this before, right? You've done some of the migration stuff, but why don't we talk about the actual non-live migration options?
Right.
And so first of all, let me talk about VMM, and then I think you could talk about the MVMC, right?
Sure.
Cool. So there's two different migration options we have to go and move between our VMware infrastructure over to our Hyper-V infrastructure. The first one is built into Virtual Machine Manager itself, and we call this a V to V conversion, virtual to virtual. Basically, what we do here is we go and connect to our VMware infrastructure. Actually, this brings up a question we're always going to get, so I'm going to address this question first. What are our dependencies on VMware to go and manage VMware? We always need a vCenter server to go and manage our ESX hosts. Now, the reason why is that individual VMware ESX hosts, they don't have open APIs that we can go and contact. So this means SystemCenter cannot speak to an ESX host and say, do a vMotion. We need vCenter to sit there as the intermediary. That has the extensible platform, the APIs. So essentially, SystemCenter speaks to vCenter. vCenter then speaks to those individual ESX hosts, ESXi hosts. And vCenter will say, do the vMotion, go deploy this service, go deploy this application. Okay, so with that in mind, going back to the migration capabilities of V to V. So basically what we do with the V to V, we go and we talk to the vCenter server, we get a list of the different VMs that we can migrate. We speak to them, we pick the VM, we'll offline the VM, we'll then start to copy the metadata. So we basically take a look at, what was the memory, what was the types of network, what type of disk did it use, what operating system, what's the VHD file, or VMDK file. Then as part of the process, we'll go and map those metadata operations or the metadata information, memory, storage, network, etc. to Hyper-V settings. We'll then go create a new Hyper-V virtual machine. We'll copy the VMDK to a VHD file, mount that VHD to our virtual machine manager instance, to our Hyper-V configuration. And so essentially we've kind of cloned that same information, copied the backend storage, moved it over here, clone it, and from that point we can go manage it, bring it online. So there are multiple steps through this process, and again, I do need to clarify, there is downtime as part of this. But next question that I get that I'm going to pass over to Justin is, what if I want to do a migration and I don't have VMM? What is the virtual machine migration converter? Sorry, the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter, MVMC.
Yes, the MVMC. If you guys can see my screen, what I've got here is, you had touched on it, Simon, in order to manage these ESXi instances, I need to have vSphere. This is a vSphere instance that I have, and you can see I've got a couple machines running on this particular host, this ESXi host that I'm managing with my vSphere server. One of the things that I did was I went out to the web and I installed the Microsoft Virtual Machine Converter tool. And the cool thing about this is it's a simple snap-in to the vSphere console. And so if you look at the machines that I have, there's several prerequisites that needs to be met.
Okay.
I think the machine needs to be powered on, needs to be domain joined, and it needs to have the VMware tools installed to do this migration. And so what I can simply do, I can grab on this server, or this guest called Convert Me, and I select Convert to Hyper-V Virtual Machine. Again, this is a snap-in that we've added to their console, which invokes the tool that you can also install standalone. This gives you a little data about, hey, here's what we're about to do, here are our capabilities. I can go through Next, pick the machine that I want to talk to, select my workspace, and this actually takes the vSphere disk, converts it to R format, does all that mapping that you talked about. You then pick a Hyper-V server that you want to mount this particular disk on that you've converted, power it up, and you can say, hey, when you convert this thing, power it up when you're ready to go. And it literally does that one-to-one mapping. Tells you anything. If the video card settings might be different, you'll get a warning about that to say, hey, we're going to convert this thing. You had 4 mega RAM on your video card on your vSphere instance. You're only going to get 2 here, or vice versa. So you'll actually get some indication about, hey, here's how we're going to convert this thing. Here's what it's going to look like when it's done, and do you want to power it off when it's ready, or power it on when it's ready to go?
Great question. So essentially 2 options. You have an option with VMM. You have an option if you don't have VMM. So while we're on the topic, I've seen just a couple questions coming through the list. Can VMM do this for VMware? Can VMM do this for VMware? So rather than answer those individually, let me just answer this as far as what are the different management capabilities that we can do for VMware using VMM? Now, what we talk about here is VMM can do what we call standard day-to-day operations. So these are regular activities such as load balancing, deploying VMs and services. However, it does not have the depth to go and do configuration activities. So the very first time you set up your VMware infrastructure, you set up your VMFS, you set up your high availability, you set up your distributed switch, kind of these initial configuration one-time things,
ready to go.
You have to go through vCenter.
Okay.
So we don't have the kind of the configuration granularity. What we're doing, again, we have that dependency on vCenter. We're basically telling vCenter to go do different things. And so these are all around our standard day-to-day operations. You know, the 90% rule, right? You've got to spend 90% of your time doing these operations. Those kind of edge cases, unfortunately, not built into VMM.
Right.
But as far as what can we do? So we can manage ESXi hosts. We can manage clusters. We could deploy VMs or services, these multi-tier services, to both Hyper-V and VMware. And you could do that not just through VMM, but also through App Controller. So I can actually use App Controller saying, I want to go deploy my Talking Heads application, and then based on the underlying capacity, it might deploy it on VMware, it might deploy it on Hyper-V, right? Again, we want to kind of decouple the underlying infrastructure. We don't want the fact that you're already invested in VMware to be an inhibitor to, move to this SystemCenter Microsoft stack. We can integrate with the existing technologies and products you have today. It's just a case of, adding SystemCenter on top, having that span management. So you could do vMotions. You could do storage vMotion.
Nice.
You could do distributed resource scheduling. So that's kind of like our dynamic optimization feature where you can load balance the traffic. One of the questions I then get always is, well, which do I use, dynamic optimization or DRS? You could actually use either. You just don't want to use them both at the same time on that particular cluster or set of servers.
Right.
So we talked about the storage capabilities. So essentially, regular standard day-to-day operations we can do. Also, templates are an important thing. If you're thinking about, migrating from a pure VMware infrastructure to a Hyper-V infrastructure, we can import templates. And it's that kind of same operation we saw with that V2V conversion, where we strip the metadata, remap that to Hyper-V settings, and then offer that as kind of a Hyper-V template.
Nice.
That type of information. So pretty broad management activities across kind of your standard day-to-day activities. Anything else around VMware that we've got coming through here?
Yeah, so we've got an integration pack for VMware.
Integration, absolutely.
Yeah.
Why don't you give us a quick overview of this VMware integration pack for Orchestrator?
Yeah, like you said, Simon, I mean, one of the things we do, we're actually talking to that vSphere server. If you can see my screen, I've actually got a kind of a runbook defined that's going to go through and manage my manage some guests on a particular host that I'm managing with my vSphere server. So the first thing I want to do, this is kind of my Orchestrator designer. I'll go to Options and I'll connect to my vSphere server. I simply need to pass it the IP address and the credentials that I want to use to connect to this VI server. Once I connect, Simon, if you look over at the right, I've got a list of activities. Let me scroll this out. If I look at vSphere, and you can see I've got things from add network adapter, add disk, clone, create, customize, delete, get cluster properties, get host properties. Just about anything you can imagine doing from the admin console, I can automate away with some of these activities. And so what I've done here is I've defined a workflow that's going to get the host properties before, it's going to get the list of the VMs before, and the cool thing about this, Simon, is we have what's called a data bus. And so I'm actually connecting to this back-end VI server, and I'm saying, hey, Simon, tell me about all the guests that you're managing. Tell me about all the hosts that you're managing. I want to use that later in a workflow. So if I say, hey, get all the hosts now, cache that list, I'm going to do something, get all the hosts later, send me an email that says, hey, we used to have VM A, B, and C on this host. Now I have VMs A, B, C, D, E, and F. And so I can actually pull that data. I can use that data later in a subsequent activity.
And so you're saying this gives us basically dynamic automation. If traditionally you're only working with 3 servers, we now add 3 more. We can dynamically detect those additional servers and then start doing automation with that as well.
Absolutely. So again, we're publishing that to the data bus. So the first activity I have here, Simon, just to show you how easy this is just simply called create VM. You can see the configuration. I'm connecting to it. I'm giving it a folder path. And so the cool thing about this is when I connect to these, I get a list of dynamic properties that you just touched on. Here are all the different properties available to me, resources available to me on that particular VM. And so this allows me to not assume or guess what I think might be, what's the name of the data store, what's the name of the remote host, what's the name of the property for the VM. This allows me to get all that data up front. I can also use variables. We talked about, hey, when I run these workflows, I want to substitute a server name. I want to get a server name from somewhere else and publish it here. So I can define these variables. And so this is kind of one of the things that I do. I just create a variable called event. I can call it whatever I want. So no matter what I'm presenting at or what I'm doing a demo for, it will substitute whatever variable that I have in here. And I think it's actually MMS 2013, which is the variable that I used. And so that's the first property. And then as we go through this workflow, you can see I'm creating the VM. I'm going to clone that VM. I'm going to add a second interface. I'm going to add another disk. I'm going to start the VM up. I'm going to take a snapshot of it. I'm going to get the properties. I'm going to do the before and after. You see the activity there, notify the platform event. I'm going to say, hey, when you do this thing, send a platform event to Orchestrator so I know what happened. I'm going to use the new Exchange integration pack to send myself an email using my cloud-based mailbox, so it doesn't have to be an on-premise Exchange server. I'm going to let SCOM know about what I just did. I'm going to let HP OM know what I just did. And so this kind of encompasses kind of the whole gamut of the vSphere management. And so if I look at what the hosts I have right now, I just got the 3 guest machines. Running the workflow, I can run this workflow in response to an alert that I might get at a SCOM. Passing on to Service Manager, I might go into the console and run it manually. Might have some other trigger that I want to run. So I can simply, and I can run it from the web console as well. We've got a full-based, RESTful web console as well. So I can hit run this workflow and get a log of the particular activities that are going. And so in just a few minutes, you'll see the workflow started up. I can expand that out. If I go to my vSphere server, we'll see a new machine get created called, I think, MMS 2013. It's going to take a clone. It's going to add a disk. It's going to add a network resource and go from there.
Cool. Well, I actually had a pretty interesting follow-up question, kind of a specific question, but I still think broadly relevant. Could I have a single workflow here that includes both VMware and VMM logic at the same time? So for example, a conditional statement that says if I'm deploying this on my HyperV infrastructure, go this way. If I'm deploying this on my VMware infrastructure, go this way.
Absolutely. The activities that you have in an integration pack can be used interchangeably with any workflow. And so as you can see here, Simon, this particular workflow is using the vSphere IP, it's using the new Exchange IP, it's using the Operations Manager IP, and it's using the HP Operations Manager IP. I could sprinkle in some Azure if I wanted to. I could sprinkle in some FTP. I could sprinkle in some Service Manager if I like. And so, again, to answer your question, very interchangeable, whatever I need to do.
Awesome, great coverage. Now, the final VMware integration point that I want to bring up is how we can monitor the VMware infrastructure as well. So this is, of course, using SystemCenter Operations Manager monitoring. And there's actually a management pack built by partner Veeam, V-E-A-A-M, that you could go and install to Operations Manager. With Operations Manager, it can then go and monitor that full VMware infrastructure. So your host, your services, disk, storage, network. So we still also have that integration of monitoring the VMware environment as well as configuring it with VMM and automating it with Orchestrator. Well, we spent a long time kind of covering the infrastructure now. Maybe, one final question I'm going to answer about infrastructure, a DPM question I get all the time. Then I think we should move on to applications here.
Sure.
So DPM and live migration, does it work together? Yes. So in SystemCenter 2012 Service Pack 1, DPM has full support for live migration. And what I mean by that is you can back up a virtual machine while it's being live migrated. So you no longer have to think about, hey, this is my backup window. I can only back up my VMs while they are stationary on a host. We can now do backups as they're moving around dynamically. So you no longer have to really worry about that. And that covers all our different types of live migration. Storage live migration, network live migration, traditional live migration, shared nothing live migration. All right.
Good.
On to applications now.
Yeah, application. Actually had a question come in for you, Simon. You had touched on App Controller earlier. One of the questions that I see come up quite a bit, and we are portal rich. We are portal rich. Which self-service portal should I use and when? This is kind of specific to Service Manager, App Controller. What's the right answer?
Great question. We get that a lot. In our past release, we had the VMM self-service portal, VMM SSP. It's kind of an add-on. That product no longer exists because we now have App Controller. App Controller essentially went and replaced the VMM SSP. Now, the way to think about this, yes, we do have two different service portals. App Controller is dependent on VMM, and App Controller is used for infrastructure requests, deploying VMs, multi-tiered services, managing templates, deploying to cloud. So basically, if you think it interacts with VMM, that's going to be App Controller. And a lot of that's pre-configured, these types of standard operations, deploy, manage, scale out. On the other side, we have Service Manager. Service Manager is used for anything else. That was that example I showed earlier where you have that nice graphical user interface to go and configure the different parameters, enter the information. And so since that's fully extensible, use Service Manager for anything. I have a new person that needs to onboard. I need to report that one of the printers is broken. We need new paper in the printer. I mean, literally anything that you want. Any business functions.
Yeah.
Now, could you go ahead and do infrastructure type stuff using the Service Manager portal? Yes. Absolutely. Service Manager, again, ties into Orchestrator. So you could say, hey, I want to go scale out my applications, kind of do similar functionality to App Controller. Yes, you can do that. Again, you still need to kind of build those different components, build that dashboard, build those different input parameters. So simple answer, infrastructure operations, go use App Controller. Everything's pre-built, predefined. If you want that full advanced customization across any component, go with Service Manager. Cool.
Good.
So that kind of covers some of our App Controller questions. Configuration Manager. I'm starting to see a few of these come in here. Now, in the past, we've generally talked about Configuration Manager around client management, right? I have lots of Windows 8 laptops. How do I manage it?
Right.
But let's not forget, this is a great inventory, security, patch, and compliance solution. And it can manage servers, right? So question is, tell me just a little more about, does Configuration Manager do server management as well?
Yeah, you nailed it, Simon. I've got some friends over in MSIT which kind of run our own Microsoft infrastructure, and these guys are managing literally thousands of servers that we have in our own infrastructure using SCCM. When you talk about desired configuration management, where you have a server that's defined specifically how you want it, and if that server drifts its configuration for whatever reason, you can bring that thing back in. Patching, not only across all your client machines that you touched on, but patching across all of your server real estate as well. We talk about hardware inventory, software inventory, kind of where back in the day when it was called SMS is kind of where this product got started with the software inventory and hardware inventory. Still doing that for servers across the board. So again, can you use Configuration Manager for your clients? no doubt, absolutely ready to go, but it's also very good for managing those core infrastructure pieces for your servers as well.
Great point. So key message, hey, don't think the configuration manager is just about client management. We got our data center support here. And of course, you get the System Center 2012 product, you get configuration manager
Tons
anyway.
of bells and whistles on that product.
So why not use it? Exactly. Okay, so moving on now. Okay, another integration question. Perfect for our integration expert. Does Operations Manager support monitoring Linux, Unix environments? How do we go and support these open source hardware components, or open source software components?
Yeah. With the introduction of SCOM 2007 R2, we introduced the capabilities for cross-platform enablement, and so we could manage Linux servers, Red Hat servers. We could manage those servers in our infrastructure that were interesting for us for Unix and Linux management, and not just the Windows-based management. So it's not only about managing your Linux and Windows real estate using the Open Pegasus protocol that we use. And so, when we go have the discussion with the Linux administrators, we say, hey, let's put a Microsoft agent on your Linux servers. Don't worry, it's not, and when we talk to those Linux admins, it's, oh, hey, I'm not quite sure. But then once you show them the capabilities that you have around the management packs, the dashboarding, the alerting, the remediation capabilities, it's a no-brainer. And a lot of these folks open right up to us. And so managing the Linux stack, the Red Hat stack, also things like network devices. If you see the new storage or the new network capabilities that we added in 2012 R2 with some really killer dashboards around our network infrastructure, you had talked a little bit earlier about Service Manager. How does it know which routers are connecting to which resources? With Operations Manager 2012, you get that full visibility into your network. And so you can actually see how physical servers are connected to physical routers in your environment. So if you were to service that router, shut down a port for administrative purposes, whatever you needed to do, you would actually see how that could impact the rest of your service offerings to your organization.
Very cool. Yep. The network vicinity dashboard, great feature, shows you basically, it basically does a recursive algorithm, figures out how all your different network components are connected.
Yeah.
Cool. Now, another question that came in, we started to talk about what we call DevOps, right? Talking about reducing this friction between our developers, between our operations guys. You mentioned this finger pointing, right? There's a problem. Whose fault is it? It's always the developers, of course. But that's from the infrastructure perspective.
Not my developers.
So, question is, what exactly is DevOps? How do we use it? Why is it important?
Yeah, I think it's best defined as communication, collaboration, and integration between developers and IT pros. And so when you look at that, the definition sounds great, but at the end of the day, if I am a developer and I want to focus on and using these System Center tools, I can just focus on being a developer and I don't have to worry about the infrastructure. Those are good days to have. Yesterday, a year ago, 2 years ago, we didn't have that seamless kind of view between, is it a network issue, is it a code issue? It kind of gets a little bit into the APM piece that I think you can touch on a little bit as well.
Actually, we'll show a demo. I got a great demo after this.
And so what that does is it brings some very generic problem to make it very specific. There's no longer the finger pointing. You can say, hey, network guys, this is not a network issue, this is a problem in my code. Hey, code guys, this isn't a problem with the network. It's this line and this particular stored procedure against this whatever piece of code that you have running in your environment. And so taking that friction, I guess, away between the developers and your IT admins is really the goal of the whole DevOps persona, if you will.
Absolutely. And so I'm going to show you one example of how Operations Manager provides some of this DevOps. Now, one thing that we found was one of the biggest challenges with our IT department, our developers, is troubleshooting a problem. How do we know whether when there's a problem, the application performs slow? Whose fault is it? And so what Operations Manager has done, they've built a set of tests that you can run locally, or actually from different data centers that Microsoft hosts around the world to actually test your application. We could test it from the server side. You can test it from a client side using all different types of browsers. And you can even create custom tests from Visual Studio that, for example, let's say you have a web page, you want to create a test that says, click on the home, then click on login, enter this username, this password, click next. Go, like literally a series of real life scenarios. Exactly, synthetic transaction, real life scenarios. You could basically then upload those tests and have different data centers test your app from around the world.
Nice.
And when they hit a problem, you can set thresholds. If the application takes more than a half second to respond, send an alert. We can collect that data, But then, how does it connect to the DevOps? So once we collect that data, we say, hey, an app's performing slow. We have connections into Visual Studio, Team Foundation Server, where we can automatically assign these bugs directly to the developer. So you have an alert, something goes slow. Rather than having the IT guy, run these traces, connect, event logs, stuff like that, all that's done automatically. We actually document the repro steps, what browser were they using, what IP address, what HTTP call, everything.
Nice.
And package that, send it to the developer, and just have it automatically go into their Team Foundation server, active bug count. So as soon as an alert hits, they get the bug. And so again, this goal, reduce the friction, right? Streamline. But it also makes our partners happy, right? Our developers write code.
Right.
That's what they signed up to do. Our infrastructure guys run the infrastructure.
Right.
So they're not really, having to, the infrastructure guys not having to look at code.
The blame game.
The blame game,
They're
exactly.
Not playing it. No one's playing.
So let's actually jump to the demo here, and I'm going to show you one of the features that we've added in Service Pack 1. This is called Global Service Monitoring. And basically what you do, you sign up for this and download this module, and from here you can go and actually test your app from any of our 16 data centers around the world. Now I've actually already configured the app, so it's live monitoring, but I'm going to kind of show you the data, show you the results that we get. Now, this does not require Azure, okay? Even though this is run in some of the data centers that do run our Azure service, this is not Azure itself, so you do not need an Azure subscription.
And Simon, this will give me essentially visibility into how my external-facing application is really performing from a customer's keyboard.
Exactly. So let's say you're a developer based in Shanghai, China. How well does your app work from Sao Paulo, Brazil?
Got it.
Who knows, right? You are a single developer in a local location. You want to make sure that you're offering worldwide service availability.
Right.
And so this is how we can kind of test from around the world. So if you could say, hey, my connection from Sao Paulo is too slow, hey, at least you could kind of start troubleshooting that, figuring out what can I do to optimize it? What can I focus on? Do I need to think about a different protocol? Things like that.
So I've got visibility from outside in.
Correct. And then we collect all this data and we centralize it into Operations Manager. And so that's why I'm going to show you this collection of data here.
Nice.
And so basically, I've gone and set it up across these different data centers. We see a bunch in Europe, United States, Australia, Brazil.
And these are all of our properties.
China, these are correct. These are Microsoft data centers.
Nice.
Again, some are on Azure, some don't. Japan. So you can see we're pretty healthy, but we actually have two critical ones from Stockholm and from Moscow. So let's actually take a look at our detail view, maybe pick the Russia one, and take a look at the actual live data that we can get. So we can see transaction time, time to first byte, how long does that first page take to load, and get some, pretty useful information from this dashboard here.
Kind of the whole cascade.
Exactly, and so things like this, we can see that there's certain spikes at certain times. So it looks like we got a spike around 6 p.m., spike around 9 a.m. So that could indicate, hey, we get spikes in the morning when people come to work, 9 a.m., and we get spikes at the end of the day when people leave. So logging on servers, shutting them down. So a good indication that our own local workforce is impacting the availability of our apps from our external customers, just because there's more network traffic, that type of thing. So that can help you start to think about best practices or different policies. Now here's a map view. I can go click on my Moscow data center, just get some more information about it. So, this kind of gives me the actual global view of how these are laid out, and pretty good global availability, just a problem with Europe. Go over to my alert view. Actually get some information about this particular alert. So this app has a problem. The response time was this long. It was longer than we expected. I can go click on this for more information. And so essentially, this just gives us the insight to really go and show us, hey, here's the entire data center. You've got a problem. Here's the bug. Here's the information about the bug. Send it to the developer. We'll go fix it. Streamline that operation. So save thousands of hours of troubleshooting and research.
And a nice, familiar Operations Manager console.
It is. Now, I guess what we showed here, I would really call this somewhat of a hybrid cloud scenario, right? We took our local data center, we extended it into a public service provider. Of course, not quite Windows Azure, but still working with a hoster. So let's actually kind of move on to our hybrid cloud questions.
Yeah, I actually saw a couple in here, Simon. I was just jotting down with regards to the hybrid cloud. System Center Advisor.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about System Center Advisor? And the second question, kind of a tail end of that one, is it part of System Center 2012?
Another great question. Okay, so System Center Advisor is not part of 2012, though it integrates with it.
Got it.
What System Center Advisor is, it's essentially a way to go and analyze your data center for proactive problems from the cloud. So let me actually, what's more interesting is kind of walking through a bit of the history of how Advisor was built. I used to be on product engineering. I used to be a program manager like you are today, back on the cluster team. And clustering, it's a kind of complex system. You've got storage, you've got networks, VMs, applications. And so a lot of times they were just misconfigurations. And we had customers that had downtime and outages that they easily could have avoided had they just, configured the things right. Maybe they had a file server and a SQL server and a Hyper-V host on the same physical server. Well, the SQL transactions are going to block live migration traffic. Hey, you're not going to have a successful virtualization infrastructure.
Right.
So what we did, we worked, and all these other teams, so this includes Exchange, SharePoint, Link, SQL, all of our big partners, and then, of course, core Windows Server, so Hyper-V, Network, Cluster, Web Server, those type of applications. We worked with our product support, went through millions and millions of hours of customer data, figured out what are the most common problems. But then once we found those, we said, what is a programmatic way that we can detect these and then offer a resolution? And so essentially what Advisor does is it goes onto all of the servers in your own data center, scans them by looking at the registry, and first of all it says, what type of role is installed? Is it Hyper-V? Is it SQL? Based on that first metric of the role, then it's going to go look at the registry and say, what hotfixes do you have? What other roles do you have? What are these settings? It will then go collect that data, send it back up to public cloud, so the SystemCenter Advisor cloud service. All of the processing happens there. So there's not even like a perf hit on your local data center of analyzing, figuring out the best practice.
Just some lightweight agent on the box?
It actually uses the SCOM agent.
Nice.
If you have SCOM installed already, it will use that agent. If you don't have SCOM in your infrastructure, basically you can download that agent and deploy it. It uses the same technology.
Kind of profiles that server, says, hey, what are you running? What do you have installed? Collects that data, sends it up.
Pushes it to a single collection point. That single collection point then goes and pushes that up to the cloud. All the processing is done there. And then there's two options to go and visualize that data. First is through the website, systemcenteradvisor.com, and that's where you go to actually sign up for this free service. And you can just say, hey, here's the information on this server. I'm missing this hotfix. Here's the link to go download it. So it doesn't just tell you the problem, it tells you the resolution as well. So very, very nice way to troubleshoot that. But secondly, with Service Pack 1, it now integrates into Ops Manager itself. So there's a module that you can add to Operations Manager that collects, views, and allows you to aggregate all of your data from across all your different services. Very cool. So you can view it in that single location.
Single pane of glass for the management.
Single pane of glass simplified. So think of the difference between Operations Manager and Advisor as Operations Manager does live real-time monitoring. There's a problem, it alerts you. The Advisor component does proactive monitoring. It makes sure that there's no problems that exist before you actually get the environment running.
A true advisory capacity.
Advisory capacity. Exactly. And again, it's free.
Even
go
better.
to systemcenteradvisor.com. So just go download it, check it out. If you're a consultant, hey, it's kind of a cool opportunity to get some additional insight and analysis of your own customers' data centers.
Nice. I had another one come in, Simon, for you. Is there any integration with Windows Azure?
Oh, where do we start?
Yeah. How much time do we have?
So, as we try to start to think about, what Microsoft calls its vision of the cloud OS, the cloud-enabled data center, we're starting to realize, hey, at points in time, you're going to need to scale up, right? We already talked about scaling to hosters, but now we want to think about, being able to manage workloads up in Windows Azure, Microsoft's cloud service. So with Virtual Machine Manager, there's limited integration through that. It actually all comes through App Controller. So App Controller is actually going to kind of be our entry point for our VMs up to Azure.
Like you showed earlier.
Like I showed, I had those 4 subscriptions, so I can deploy an app either in my local data center,
wherever it is,
my hoster, or up in Windows Azure using that same technology. Operations Manager has a management pack to monitor Azure services as well as your particular component in Azure. So you could check on the health of your application in the cloud. Data Protection Manager has a feature that allows you to actually back up information to Azure. So let's say you're running out of local storage. You have some stuff that you don't access very often. You could use Azure as an archive. Azure also has built-in replication across its different data centers. So you can even use that as almost like a backup replication download to a second data center technology. So almost a recovery type scenario there.
Some serious SSD on the Azure backend.
Absolutely, yep. Pretty fast hardware. Configuration Manager allows you to go and monitor the clouds deploy through different cloud services, your software, to your different components. So maybe you're not connected to Corpnet, you can connect to a public cloud, deploy components. But I also know Orchestrator actually has some nice integration as well. So I'll probably hand that back over to you.
Sure.
I believe you already have the management integration pack installed as well, right? Can we actually take a look at that?
Yeah, sure, Simon. We absolutely have a integration pack for Orchestrator for all the IaaS functions. And so if you look at what we have with Windows Azure, we've broken it down into a couple categories: certificates, cloud services, deployments, storage, virtual machine disks, virtual machine images, and virtual machines themselves. And so I've essentially got a workflow here that's going to do a couple things. Do you see that I'm going to go list the Azure services? So essentially, Simon, I'm saying, hey, connect to my Azure service. I'm giving it my PFX file, and I'm giving it a password to say, hey, this machine, this connection is available to connect to my Azure service. And so if you look at my cloud services I have today, I don't have anything, but this is my subscription that I have. Then I'm going to go through and I'm just going to, remember we talked earlier about the foundational objects? I'm going to create some random text, and I'm going to give that as my service name. I'm going to create the Azure Cloud Service. Again, I'm going to choose the activity for my Azure subscription. So when I pick on Create Cloud Service, I may want to do something else. But in this particular activity, I'm doing Create a Cloud Service. You can see I can do delete, update, list, cloud, check the availability, or create the affinity group. I'm going to use the random text from the previous activity. So I'm publishing that data to the bus. I'm then recycling it, using an activity later. Label, again, in my way of kind of cheating on these demos, I just give it a variable called event description. Pass it my affinity group, and so again, I'm able to connect to my Azure subscription in real time and figure out, okay, what affinity groups or locations do I have available to me? Pick the one that I want, go through and build my workflow. Then I'm going to actually take the package configuration that I have for my Azure deployment, an MVC4 application. So I've got my config and my service packages. So the scenario is I've got some developer who's writing an MVC4 application. They save the packages to a share. This workflow comes along, detects those, puts them into Azure, puts them into a storage blob, sets my Azure deployment, and then at the end of the day, I'm going to send a platform event, I'm going to send an email, and then I'm going to swap the deployment from the staging environment to the production environment.
Wow.
And so this is all done within the workflow. So can I do this from the UI? Yeah. Do I have that 10 minutes that I would like to spend doing it 50 times a day? No, I don't. And so I'm just going to fire up this workflow, and you can see initialize data, list cloud services, generate the random text, walk through this workflow. At the end of the day, I'm going to get an email that says, hey, Justin, by the way, we've created a new service for you. We've assigned it a virtual machine. It's got your application published to it. And then if you wanted to run the swap deployment as a trigger on something else, hey, let my developer and my QA team test to make sure that in the staging slot it looks good. Then let's flip it over to production. And so in just a few minutes, we don't have to wait for this, but in just a few minutes you'll see that cloud service start to populate. You'll see the VMs come in. It'll upload the certificate, and I'm ready to go. And I've just completely automated IaaS against my Azure subscription using Orchestrator.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That was a great question. And as we are running out of time, we're going to wrap up answering the live questions here. Please continue to ask them. Our live Q&A team will keep helping you out. But I'm going to now jump to our final demo as we kind of wrap up the day. And up to now, we've kind of talked about these different capabilities. Well, first we started with our introduction, right?
Yep.
And we looked at our automation layer. We looked at our infrastructure layer, our application layer, and then finally our hybrid cloud. So how do we go scale that out?
Yep.
But one other great thing is this integration within the different System Center components as well. Now, I'm going to show you a demo here where I'm actually going to go crash a website. Operations Manager is going to detect the alert, create a ticket in Service Manager. Service Manager is then, based on that information, going to go and create an automated workflow, try to resolve that particular problem, and if everything works, like I'm sure it will, then we're actually going to get our website automatically come back online. So even though this particular example, I'm kind of doing a service outage scenario, think about this automation across the stack and the integration we have with Orchestrator to show you could do anything with the data center, onboarding, problem resolution, just even email or text file management, things like that. So let's jump over to the demo here and quickly going back through our environment here. I have System Center Service Manager. I have System Center Orchestrator, my runbook designer. I have Operations Manager. finally, let me get my website loaded here. So I'm going to go load my Dinner Now application. Okay, so this is my website here. We're going to go kill this, and we're going to automatically fix this. So this is the power of SystemCenter. And, you know, as part of service uptime, this is important for the business. You know, when your services, your key business processes are down, you're losing money. So service continuity, again, this is what we're focusing on with this kind of new model of our private cloud. Don't worry about the individual server, where it's hosted. Worry about the service and how we keep that always online. So I actually have a PowerShell script here that's going to go and crash my IIS server. So if I go back to my website, hit refresh, sure enough, service is unavailable. Okay, so in this scenario, you know, I see this problem a lot, right? My website always crashes. I have a series of standard troubleshooting steps that I use as part of my IT department, right? When I see this problem, a ticket opens, I have a knowledge base where I'll go step 1, step 2, step 3. That is a standard process, something that could be put in a template. So going back to that theme of templating, this is something that we want to look at and actually standardize this resolution, these steps to fix this. So by now, Operations Manager should have seen this active alert. And somewhere down here, yep, I see Web Application Dinner Now website. So what we see here is this alert has been triggered. And so this means that Operations Manager detected website's down. Now, what we are doing, since we have a connector into Service Manager, we're going to go create a ticket. Anytime we have an incident in our environment, we want to create a ticket. Even if we automatically fix it, we still need to inventory, keep track, so that, you know, as we're doing monthly reports, where are actual problems, you know, we start to collect and aggregate that data.
You can do your root cause analysis.
Exactly.
At the end of the day, right? Now that you've got this in SM, you can go back and say, yeah, we had this outage, but let's figure out what exactly happened.
Exactly. And Service Manager has some really rich reporting capabilities, integration with the data warehouse as well.
Nice.
So let's actually go down to my work items, take a look at my actual incidents. And remember the terminology again. An incident is a temporary service outage. A problem is the underlying cause. So in this case, we're doing incident management. We're trying to fix this immediate outage. And I'll go take a look at all of my open incidents. And I'm going to go and quickly filter here by my Dinner Now application. And sure enough, we now have this alert that's come up. So again, service went down, Ops Manager detected it, created a ticket in Service Manager.
And does Service Manager know what to do with this?
It does. And you know why? Let me actually show you. Because we have what we call, connected with this, a remediation activity, auto-remediation. And basically what this is saying, hey, when you see this alert, go and run this automation activity.
Nice.
And so we have a connector to Orchestrator, and so we see this alert, we go and kick off a runbook and try to fix this problem. So let's actually go over to Orchestrator now, cancel out of this, hop over to Orchestrator, and take a look at this particular runbook here, my remediation runbook. Now, what we're basically doing here, again, this is all connected, right? What we're going to do here is we're going to go walk through this workflow and try to fix this issue. Now, again, my IT department, they always go through these steps. Exact same steps, it's in a knowledge base. Let's go standardize it, let's automate it. So we get the incident from Service Manager. This includes information such as what's the name of the server that's out, you know, who's hosting it, what's the IP address. So this basically allows us to collect information that we need to then go and plug into our workflow. So first thing we do is test our Dinner Now application. Maybe we had a temporary network outage. The application's perfectly healthy.
Issue, it's good to go.
We want to avoid a false positive and do
Got it.
anything destructive. So we're just going to test the app really is down. If it's back online and running, we say it's resolved. Everyone's happy. Close the ticket. If it's not, then we're going to start our troubleshooting steps. Now, first step, restart IIS. This will cause some service outage. That's why we want to just really test it's out first. We'll go test the app again. If it's working, we say it's resolved. If not, we're going to go to some more advanced troubleshooting step. Restart our application pause. Check if it's working again. If it is, mark it as resolved. If it's not, then we need to go escalate. Only then, after we've gone through our basic troubleshooting steps, do we need to actually get
a human involved.
Get a human involved.
Right.
So this standard repetitive troubleshooting, automated, it's only the advanced troubleshooting. We're going to need to go get our humans involved. So let's go back to Service Manager. Hopefully by now that workflow kicked in. We tried those steps, and our app's back online.
Nice.
So I'm going to refresh my view, and we can see that that alert disappeared. So what that means is one of those actions worked, we retested our application, it came online, and then we marked this incident as resolved.
Bidirectional.
Exactly.
Nice.
So it's now closed in Service Manager. So the IT department, since this was resolved automatically, they don't even know about it, right? An incident popped open, it was closed again.
Maybe we can go back and look at it later.
Exactly. Pull it up in the reporting. So now let's go back to Operations Manager. We'll refresh this. Looks like our alert has once again disappeared. So let's do the big test now. See if our website's back up and running. Click refresh, and sure enough,
boom,
our website is back up. So what you saw here was really rich integration in service continuity. No matter what the problem is, no matter how we need to go resolve it, as long as we have a programmatic way, standardized steps, automation, we can go through this end-to-end workflow and essentially resolve everything that we need here.
Looks good, Simon.
Great. Now what I'm finally going to do here, we're going to wrap up the day. I do want to encourage everybody to continue asking the questions. And as we wrap it up, I do want to encourage everybody to make sure you actually try this out. We have a lot of great eval software already available. We have HyperV Server 2012 already free, and everything else is available on the Microsoft Eval Center. System Center 2012, Windows Server 2012. Make sure you check out our TechNet forums if you have any additional questions which weren't answered or you have follow-up questions. We regularly have our product team as well as MVPs going through this, helping you out. We have in-person training activities with our IT camps. The Microsoft Virtual Academy, our free online training portal. And if you want to go take some classes for Microsoft Learning, we have our class locator, our System Center courses, and our private cloud certification. A great way to really build up your resume and show that you're ready to kind of take these next steps towards moving towards this cloud-based infrastructure. With that, we want to thank you for joining our show. Hopefully you learned a lot. Hopefully you got a lot of great questions answered. I also want to make sure I thank Justin. Really appreciate you coming on the show and helping us out here.
Thanks for spending the time, folks.
Hopefully you guys learned a lot and you guys are now ready to go deploy Windows Server 2012, System Center 2012, and Windows Azure. Thank you.